Friday, everyone. This is Red Bull Friday, sponsored by there's no sponsors here. However, somebody did make a suggestion to turn the Red Bull up and to the right, which coinciding with the end of the bear. Not sure we're quite in a bull yet, but the end of the bear, it's going that way. It's going that way up and to the right. Got those red flames. Think of them as green, however you like. But today is going to be fun. Today is money printer strategies, PulseChain in particular. So got a few gentlemen, at least a couple right now, who are going to be discussing a lot of different ways to make bank in this ecosystem. And one of them, which is involved with a product, which is kind of the bank of PulseChain in a lot of ways. And the other gentleman is a game theory connoisseur. I mean, they're probably both game theory connoisseurs, I guess. So very, very fun, very interesting conversation. I think that you're going to get a lot out of it. No pressure on the guests or anything, but I've got a whirlwind of topics and questions and a lot of things I'm trying to figure out as well. I'm trying to get my strategy together. I've got a few pieces. I've just been one of the benefits of being a streamer and creator in this community is being able to talk to a lot of people and get their ideas, bounce ideas off each other, and put something together that at the end or in the end ends up being a good idea. So that's what we're trying to get to. That's what I'm trying to get to at least. So without further ado, welcome to the stream, Dylan and Cryptographics. What's happening, gentlemen?
Not much. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks, man. Good to be back. 2 days in a row. Let's go.
It's been a long time, Graphics.
It's been a minute.
It's been 24 hours exactly. Yes, me and Graphics did a stream yesterday that I don't want to say shouldn't have happened. The stream should have happened. It was just completely redone at the last moment, and it turned out wonderfully. So that's always a good thing when it happens.
Yeah, exactly. Can't go wrong with that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, man, it's awesome. And yesterday's stream was just again chock full of some other strategies or other interesting ways to think about things as well. So encourage everyone to look at the stream with me and Graphics yesterday, as well as this one, because we're going to get into the weeds. And are your bodies ready, gentlemen? Are your bodies ready?
I'm ready.
I'm ready.
I love getting in the weeds.
So start off with I love getting in the weeds. Let's start off with this. What are and we'll get into Fiat in a little bit too. I want to dig into that, how that the type of angles, and of course, if there's some of those angles that you want to do with strategy wise as well, feel free. But we'll start with Dylan first. What is going to be some of the few things that you're doing, or you think a lot of people will do, that sound like smart things to do in preparation for launch, and then pre-bridge and then after bridge? Like, how have you sort of came up with some ideas of like how to get the money printers go burr, or hold on to those money printers so they go burr for a long time? Like, how are you sort of reasoning about this now that we think mainnet is closer than it's ever been?
Sure. So back when PulseChain and everything was really being, when the sacrifice was still going on and things like that, the very early game theory that was really controversial at the time was what the AMM bot would do with the HEX, right? And arguably everything that's harvested to the AMM bot, other than things we care about like HEX, Hedron, maybe like Icosa, the Maxi stuff, if they're even paired with ETH. I'm not sure that they are. It would be important to figure out, okay, well, the ratios between the spot price at the time of the fork and then the AMM bot fixer and what it'll price them the assets at themselves, right? And so one of my first things that I was really trying to get out there was the opportunity from what you sacrificed price wise, objectively speaking, your HEX per pulse. So one HEX for 2,000 pulse, right? That was your entry price, I guess you could say, just for all intents and purposes.
Sure.
And then you take the re-ratio of 1.2 million to supplement the inflated supply of pulse through these. The whole goal of it was to equalize the market caps, right? And then you take that 1.3 or 1.2 million, and then you multiply it by the current spot price of ETH HEX, okay? And you get a price of, like if we forked right now, of about, let's see here, you'd get HEX with, you'd get 30, maybe 33 pulse per HEX, right? So that's a huge difference than, one HEX for 2,000 pulse. So at the time, that was probably one one of my biggest trades to get back into HEX. So I would have, still sell all of my Pulse for HEX, as fast as I could to try and get that rate back because of the difference from when you sacrificed. So that's one of the things that I was really pushing in the beginning. But, now it's maybe overcrowded. So I don't know. Would love to hear you guys' thoughts, and we can,
Well, just on that too, it seems to be the most common thing you hear is, a lot of people miss the PulseX, regardless of even the number wise, which that's what I want to dig into with you too. It's like with considering the numbers and things and the current price, and we don't know where HEX is going to be on launch. We assume higher, but who knows? But a lot of people want to trade. They want to get PLS. They want to get more PLSX maybe. They want to do anything but get more HEX, it seems like most people, at least when you hear on crypto Twitter and stuff. You talked about overcrowded too. Is that something that the people who want PHEX, is that something to take advantage of? It's, hey, I'm going to get I guess me and Graphics were kind of talking about this yesterday of like what a good deal looks like, whether you should use the ratios or other numbers to look at that. Is there sort of a contrarian view of this to take as well, or like going against the crowd, or can you benefit having all the PHEX? How should we think about that?
So the way I would look at it is, I think that you could say the regular Joe Schmo guy that enjoys HEX, and then is just gone all in on Pulse. I think that those are the guys that are probably going to want to trade their HEX, or if they didn't even, sacrifice for Pulse, those guys are probably going to want to buy HEX now and then sell HEX when for Pulse when PulseChain goes live. Right now, I think that I speak with a lot of bigger guys, and their view is, I would say the opposite, right? Because essentially you're buying the top of so the AMM, it fixes everything, but all the ratios are extremely expensive versus everything else, which is fine because you're not going to really get that much value out of the worthless stuff anyways, right? But with HEX, it's going to retain a value. So I would go out on a limb and say that it would probably not be smart to sell your HEX for Pulse at the fork if it's 30-1, right, or 50-1. That's probably not a good trade. But I mean, that's just my take on it. So.
Well, the common and Graphics, I'll let you get in just a second. I just one more thread on this, because something I didn't talk about yesterday that I was going to bring up is the common counterpoint to that would be, why wouldn't you trade everything? Why wouldn't you trade all of your HEX for the not 10,000x thing yet, right? Like, unless you think HEX is going to 10,000x, and a lot of people, different time horizons, blah, blah, blah. Hey, maybe HEX does the 10,000x in the next few years. I don't know if many people think it's going to do it in the next 6 months or 2 years, which is probably a lot of people's time horizons. Why wouldn't you trade the thing that's already went up 10,000x and went back down, let's say 1,000, 2,000x, whatever it is, for the thing that could explode in the coming bull market? Like, how do you get people out of that? I mean, is that an incorrect mindset, or is there something to that?
My view is maybe there's a dip. Then what? You bought the top. Rip. So
okay. So strategy wise, it's consider there may be a dip. There may be a PulseChain dip, and if you're trading it on the pre-bridge, especially, you could be losing out on a much better price later on. Is that kind of what you're thinking? Perhaps.
I mean, what do you think, crypto TFX? What do you think?
Yeah. Well, I agree with your sentiment. I think they're getting in initially and just trying to go straight to it, dump all your HEX into Pulse. I don't think that's a good strategy in any way, shape, or form. It's way too high risk, and everything basically is against you, in my opinion, at least, that you're getting a good deal at that point. And that's going to be the best deal you're going to see. Like you said, I think once mainnet launches, we're going to see a lot of volatility. And so having a strategy that spreads out that risk over a period of time is far more likely to benefit you in the long run, considering that, like you said, there's going to be dips, and when you do see those dips, if you have a more consistent strategy, like something like dollar cost averaging, or even, just being simple in that front. And then when you do see a dip, going in a little bit heavier on a dollar cost average than you normally would, I think it's a fantastic way to basically play the initial the setup. We were talking about this yesterday in terms of HEX versus Pulse and HEX versus PLSX. And I think the interesting conversation here is, remember, there's a bunch of things to think about, in my opinion. One is, like, what do you think is gonna what do you expect all these tokens to do? Do you think Pulse and PulseX are going to perform similarly? Do you think Pulse is going to outperform PulseX? Do you think PulseX is going to outperform Pulse? Do you think HEX is going to outperform? And then you have to look from that point based on what you expect or what you think is going to happen at which is the better buy. Because if you think Pulse and PulseX are going to, let's say you think Pulse and PulseX are going to do similar in performance, like PulseX, the buy and burn is going to be a monster and it's going to help PulseX keep up. Well, then which one goes up first and which one goes down first is going to be the thing that I would be looking at to see where to put my funds. Why would you buy the thing that goes up first if they're both going to end up in the same position versus the thing that goes down first? You can get more of the thing that goes down first versus getting less of the thing that goes up first when they're both going to end up in the same position. You're going to be far behind if you do that strategy. So really, I think just patience and not trying to rush into it, try to make any rash decisions, try to overanalyze things. Just look, is there a dip? Yes. Put a little bit extra in maybe. Is the ratio, do I want to get a little bit of pulse? Go in a little bit here, go in a little bit there, and just be consistent with it. I don't think overanalyzing and trying to basically be a trader when I think most of us can attest that like all of us that have tried to trade or think we're even adequate enough to maybe trade have all had a backfire on us to some degree and probably won't do it. And the rest of the people that maybe would try and trade are not qualified enough to actually, or skilled enough, let's be honest here, to actually make the right call 100% of the time. I'd say most of the people that would try and do a trader's mindset are going to get wrecked for sure. And preventing that comes down to, I believe, at least consistency and having thresholds and parameters that if things move, you adjust your strategy based on how things are moving around, but you have something as your baseline over time plan that you're following.
For sure. Yeah. And do you all have like, I mean, we're talking about all these different scenarios and, you know, what if, what if there's a dip after, there's a dump afterwards? What if we don't know what the ratios are going to be? Ton of unknowns. Is there like a spreadsheet or something? Like, do you all like keep track of this stuff of if this happens, then this is the correct move. If this happens, this is the correct move. How have you, both of you, been planning for this type of thing? Or are you still trying to put it together?
So for me, I, have a few things written down, but I don't have a whole Excel sheet with, if XYZ, if X, then Z, or all that shit, right? I don't have any of that, but I just, I've been around doing this stuff for a while. So I kind of just can tell, okay, well, this is not a good deal, or, okay, this is a good deal, or, all right, well, there's a price difference here between these two pools. So, arbitraging it, and okay, I can only make 1,000 pulse. So never mind, this is not worth it for me. Or, going between, multiple different pools, there's going to be mispricing all over PulseX in the beginning, just naturally. There's not going to be an aggregator, right? If you're trying to dump a lot of something for another thing, and you try and do it all at once, you're not going to get good price execution. It's going to leave an arbitrage opportunity between a different pool that had less liquidity, that now, you can even out the prices. So there's gonna be a lot of that going on. There's tons of things where you can just sit down, watch, and wait and figure out, okay, somebody fucked up there. So now I'm going to go and take that opportunity and even out the market, get a little bit of profit doing it. Right. So, shit like that, where it's arbitrage, and it's not like, obviously not risk free, but it's a lot less risky than speculating on, okay, this is overpriced. I think I'm going to sell it here. And okay, this is underpriced. I think I'm going to buy it here. Right. There's a lot more risk that goes into that than, just leveling out the market and making it more efficient. Right. So, I'll probably just be watching to see, okay, price mismatching between pools and stuff. So that's what I'll be doing, I guess.
Yeah. And for graphics too, with it, you can talk about if you have a plan, and also, are there some I guess two part of this question. First, maybe you can talk about your plan if you have one, or like anything like that. And then, is there some no-brainer situations where you're like, okay, other than like, I don't know, it's even hard to talk about prices being good deals or ratios being good deals, but is there some like signals of like, whoa, this is happening, I'm going to make a move? Like, you can talk about that as well.
So, I mean, first of all, like my plan's very simple. I've made a lot of the moves and I've already gotten positions in the tokens that I really want to be in. And, you know, I was lucky enough to get into the PulseX sacrifice, and I don't really plan too much on moving anything around, because I think that over the coming bull market and the next, me trying to move things here and there to get an extra 10, 15, 20, 50%, couple X's, and how risky that could be in terms of backfiring on me isn't worth it, when really at the end of the day, if things go all well, it's good enough anyways. I don't need to be I don't feel the need personally to go for the extra pennies here and there. So I'm sitting back and I'm watching. But the thing that I keep thinking about in terms of like when we're talking about the launch, and it comes to unknown unknowns and all the possible variables. So when it comes to tracking all of this, I don't have anything spread out on a spreadsheet or anything written down, but there's just, over time, you start to understand, at least from my vantage point, for me anyways, I've been starting to understand just how many factors there are. And every time you put one more factor on the table, that dovetails into another handful of things that you need to consider, and so on and so forth. And it just comes down to like, there's no game plan that's going to be right. There is no game plan that is going to be right in this. You need to, or for me at least, I'm looking at this like, okay, what is everything I can put on the table? What are the educated guesses I can look at that might happen? And then have those as all possibilities, in terms of like looking even at the sacrifice guys, the top 5 and 6 wallets, you know, those guys alone at a 10x, if Pulse ever does a 10x from its sacrifice rate, that is like $2 billion sitting in the hands of 11 wallets alone. So, I mean, you got to consider how much sell pressure that is alone in the initial phase, and how much volatility we're likely to see on top of that, just with the market pressure alone, before those guys get $2 billion in their hands. So, I mean, and then you consider the rest of the money that's going to be held by PLS and PLSX. All this to say, more plans does not equal better outcome. Sometimes just sitting back, taking things and watching for that obvious sign of, I need to make a move now, and not trying to plan ahead and wait for the stars to align, and they never do, is far better in my opinion.
I agree with that.
Sorry, what was the second point of your question again, though?
Is there some no-brainer, like you see this happening, I'm going to take advantage of it one way or another?
Well, I think if any of the bigger tokens start to really dump, I think that's a signal. I think that's a signal that you might be looking at an opportunity, and again, might. But you have to go in and assess what's like, especially if you're talking ratio trades, man, even if something's dumping in the ratio trade window, I still think you're in high risk territory, because it's so hard to look at how that relates to all the other pools. So, I mean, if you see a dump though post bridge, I think that's a potential opportunity. But short of that, I think just keeping calm and not really trying to do too much. The dips are the thing I would only be paying attention to personally, in terms of just accumulating.
I'm going to be very specific. Both of you will start with Dylan, since you went on this point a little bit, and he's fresh in the mind of listening to you think about it as well. What would you look at the screen and say, I'm going to buy that, or whoa, I'm going to sell now? Like, what would you have to see on the screen to make that happen? Like one or more examples.
I mean, if I see, like a 1 to 10 for like one pulse, or I'm sorry, 1 hex gets me, 10 pulse or something like that. I'm going to sell all my pulse as fast as I can, right? Because that's a ridiculously good back into hex, right? If I see, one hex for 2,000, or that'd be the stack rate of pulse. But if I see 1 hex for like maybe 1,000 pulse, then I'd probably buy that, right? If I see a 1 to 10 pulse hex, probably would buy that too. If I see, because the starting ratios of Pulse and PulseX is going to be 1 to 1.6 or 1.06. So it'll be extremely close to 1 to 1. And I would think that, they probably go back to around 1 to 3, 1 to 4, maybe 1 to 5. So, a 1 to 10 would probably be a good deal. If I see, if there's any sort of like 80% down kind of things that aren't the forked over coins and stuff, probably would start buying those as well. I mean, shit like that, right? If like over exuberance, okay, and then on the other end, and you start seeing things that are up 10x or some shit like that, right? Like, okay, it'd probably be smart for me to start, getting out of this, or opening shorts or something like that, right? I wouldn't want to, think, okay, this shit's up 10x in a week. Maybe I should go buy some. Like, that's probably not a smart idea. You probably shouldn't do that.
I was going to ask, what is the time frame of that you would see a 10x where you'd be like, okay, this is too fast? What is it?
I mean, if I saw like 300% in a day, I'd be like, okay, well, probably want to start getting out of this right now. So
yeah, but
like,
you mentioned like 10x in a week. What is the threshold? Like, is 10x in a month okay? Is 10x in 3 months okay?
Well, I mean, this is crypto, right? I mean, so with that being said, HEX did some pretty crazy stuff in the beginning, okay, after it dumped. And it was gradual. So it went up a lot, but it was gradual, right? And then its first run up from January of 2020 till I believe June, if I'm not mistaken. It had a very nice run up, maybe around 1000x, if I'm not mistaken, maybe 2000, or I'm sorry, like a 200x or something like that. It was a lot of X's, okay. But then it had like a year long where it just went down, and then after a big payday, it had a pretty sharp rise, pretty big payday, and then it dumped again. But it depends on market sentiment. I do think that if something goes up 10x in a week, you probably should sell that, right? You probably shouldn't hold that. That's probably not a good idea, just naturally speaking. But things happen in crypto that are beyond what you can comprehend. So, that's a hard one, right? So,
that's the hardest thing in this ecosystem is like, after seeing all the X's with HEX, it's hard to even look at a 10x and be like, do I want to miss out on my 100x? Like, it's hard to. It's so good, you have to like literally shake yourself and be like, hey, think about what's actually happening.
Fair enough. Yes. But hey, 10x is not such a bad thing. Just saying. So,
well, I think a rule of thumb too is that people can use, again, not financial advice in any way, but I've thought about it too. Is like 10%. People say, okay, how much bag should I sell? What is reasonable? Is there any kind of, maybe there's a rule of thumb or something just simple to go by? What do y'all think about? And sorry, I'll let you come in a minute, graphics on that part as well. But 10x every 10% up to 50% of your bag. Is that crazy? Is that reasonable? Does that work for most people? What do you all think on that?
That's a very personal question, sir. It depends on each person, right? So that's not something I can say like, hey, this is what you should do. This is a personal question. It depends on your circumstance. Do you need the money? Are you staking it, or is it locked up, or are you providing liquidity, or it depends. So
yeah, I mean, if we frame it in the fact that, okay, let's say a person, again, not myself, not talking about anyone in particular, but I'm just saying what the ethos of a lot of people around launch, and I feel like a lot of people are going to want to take profit, spend 2 years, blah blah blah. Let's say your time horizon's like, I'm going to sell half my bag in the next 6 months or a year on the best times to do it, and the rest of it I'm going to leave in and let it go to the moon. Is there, other than that, I'll just 10 50, you could call it something like that. Is that something that would fit in the scenario of that people wanting to take profit within 6 months to a year? Or is there something else you've thought about that is, would be even, I don't know, even less risky or better in some way?
I think what you guys should probably do is mentally prepare yourself for a dip. Okay. And don't think about, how much profit you're going to make, right? You guys don't prepare yourself for dips, right? Like, HEX went down 98% in the first month. Okay. And it didn't recover until almost a year later. Right. So, and I mean, it's not entirely comparable to PulseChain or PulseX. I understand that, but I would mentally prepare for a dip, or, a lot less value than you thought you would get. So, and UFO 2 says, use limit orders. Yeah, that's a great idea. But there could be extreme volatility to where some of them don't execute, or the limit orders on PulseX in particular, they tie up your money. So it's not like 0x, where you can post a limit order and still have your funds in your wallet, and then if it triggers, then it fills your limit order. You literally have to, you take your money, you give it to PulseX, and then it sits in a smart contract until it decays. So you have a time selection, right? Or you leave it there forever until it fills, right? So you can't do anything with that money. It just sits there the whole time. You know what I mean? So,
yeah.
I mean, you could do limit orders. And we don't know if it's going to be available right away, because on testnet, it took a couple of weeks before the V3 PulseX was completely rolled out to where you could actually use that stuff. I don't know about V4. I haven't completely gone through it in that sort of way yet, but yeah, I mean, you could use limit orders, but it's just one of those things where sometimes paying attention may help a little bit more. But yeah, I don't know. I think you guys should mentally prepare for dips. That's
limit order. I was just gonna say on limit orders, the limit orders are like the liquidity providing for the impatient. It's they're so funny how they're like kind of interchangeable, but for liquidity, you got to wait till your range gets hit. It's over time, blah blah blah.
And also, these limit orders, how they work on PulseX is, if the market isn't liquid enough, the price has to go past your average execution price. So let's say, as the market is falling, it naturally becomes more liquid. Okay. And you have a limit order of, say, 100 grand. All right. And your 100 grand is going to move the price 20%. Well, for it to actually give you the correct output of coins, it doesn't chip away at your order. It does a whole market buy. So what would happen is it would have to pass your order by, I think it's more than 20%, because of the way the X times Y equals K equation works. So it would have to go past your order by like 40% or something like this, if you're moving the price, 20% on your execution. Or I'm sorry, it'd be 10% past your price. So, in that sort of way, it's a little bit more nuanced than just putting a limit order in, right? So you also have to consider that, because you're going to be really pissed if you put in a limit order, it goes past your price and it doesn't fill. That would piss me off, right? So,
yeah, definitely. Graphics. Sorry, Will. Do you still remember your thoughts, or you have new thoughts?
Yeah,
no, that's all good.
Deal. And I was just like, I know Graphics was going to say something a few minutes ago. I just hope he's still got it in there somewhere.
It's okay. I don't know what I was going to say. I definitely agree with everything you're saying, though, Dylan. I think you pretty much hit everything that I could possibly really say on that front. I think thinking about, or saying that, like, everything in terms of taking profits is very, very personal. I think, it'll range from people, watching the price go up 5-10x and taking profits, to the people who literally just take their tokens, open PulseChain, say hi to them, and then close the wallet and come back a year and a half later and check in on them. It'll range, and everyone's got to check in with themselves to see what makes the most sense for them. What are they capable of? And yeah, just go from there. So that's really all I got on that front. I think you nailed it, Dylan.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, cold wallets. I wouldn't be surprised to see people sending 10, 20% to cold wallets and just sit on it and forget it. I feel like that's going to be, I can't think of a reason that's a bad idea. I'll say that.
Yeah. And I mean, if I'm not mistaken, Matty Allen's doing this thing where you can send your pulse away and lock it up for a time period. So, hey, there's people that could be doing that, right? So they could save themselves from themselves, right?
That's what I love about HEX. Although HSIs, I have this whole deal with HSIs. I love HSIs. However, I don't do my retirement bags with HSIs because I do not trust myself from temptation. So it's everything else they enable every other great scenario though. Just want to go to the chat, answer a couple questions before we move on. Got plenty more stuff to cover, but Mark was asking what would be best to try to get the most t-shirts on PulseChain as soon as it launches. And maybe Dylan on this, if you have an answer, we can go for it. And also Fiat, can people, I want to dovetail this into like Fiat a little bit on, I heard you on Coffee the other day talking about it, and just what can you do with HEX and Fiat as well, if we can dovetail that one.
Sure. Yeah. So, asking if you should have more T-shares before Pulse launch, that's another like personal question, right? It's a person to person kind of question. We don't know your situation. Only you do. Only you know how much you can invest into the market or that you're comfortable doing, right? So, but I mean, if you really like HEX, there's nothing wrong with having more T-shares, I guess, right? And do you want I guess you're wanting it for the fork. So, do you want it after the fork? Do you want to keep those T-shares on EHEX? Do you only want them on PHEX, etc.? So, with that being said, you could use, if you didn't even want to worry about shit like that, right? You could use Fiat, and when the training wheels are off, right? So currently the limitations on the platform are a little bit restricted in terms of HEX because of the fork at the moment, naturally. But I mean, you could be taking your HEX, depositing it on Fiat for, and then borrow against yourself for a lesser rate than you would get for staking your HEX, right? So, you deposit there, you arbitrage the yield, and you can make a little bit more on your stakes. Or if you don't have HEX and you just want to arbitrage, you could pair it. You could deposit ETH, right, where the price doesn't really move versus ETH in a drastic fashion, and you could borrow HEX, go stake it, and arbitrage the yield. Because I think right now the yield is 2.5% to borrow on HEX. And then, if you did a short stake, you'd be getting like a 9 to 10% APY. So there's definitely an arbitrage there for anybody willing to take it.
Well, the question too I had from that is, so I think the most basic thing on probably a lot of people's minds too is, wouldn't you just long, if you feel like HEX is not going to go that much further, wouldn't you just long HEX going into PulseChain launch? Is that
Sure, yeah.
just like a no-brainer? Like why wouldn't you do that? And can you do that? Like how would you do that with Fiat?
Yeah, so here, I'll pull up the dashboard real quick for you. How about that?
And graphics, any questions you have on that too, just feel free to jump in.
Gotcha. Yeah, I will.
All right, so this is Fiat. This is where you can deposit. This is your DeFi bank for all things on PulseChain that we care about, and the things on ETH that we care about, like HEX, Hedron. Sheeb is in there for the kind of underserved communities naturally, right? Because little did you know, everybody, HEX is gatekept pretty much everywhere, right? People were the black sheep of crypto, right? So there's a lot of DeFi products that are for everybody else, but not for us. Well, here we go. Now we have our own dedicated Aave fork, right? This is the bank for hexagons, okay? Naturally, as just a regular user, you could be a depositor of your HEX, right? You could borrow a stable coin to free up a little bit of cash flow, so you can conduct business in the real world outside of crypto, right? You can start whatever you want. You can buy your Lamborghini, you can buy your Rolex, and you can pay back the loan at your leisure, right? Which is fantastic, because before, if you're a large HEX guy and you wanted some cash, you had to sell the price, which kind of sucks for your bag in general, right? So that's one of the great use cases, and probably where many people will use this platform. One of the more intricate ways that you can use this platform is to leverage yourself or hedge your positions, right? So, when the training wheels come off, because they're on right now, so the actual market that you're able to deposit for HEX, for instance, is completely full at the moment, right? And that's for the platform's protection, okay? But once those come off, you can come in here, deposit HEX. You could borrow a stable coin against your HEX and go buy more HEX on the market. And you can lever up. You can get a little bit more exposure to the price movement. Okay. And the inverse of that, you could deposit, Bitcoin, Ethereum, stable coins, and then you can go borrow HEX and sell it on the market. You can open up a short, which is fantastic, right? Richard's been asking for something like that for years now, and it is finally here. You're now able to short HEX, and just I think yesterday or maybe 10 hours ago, somebody was liquidated for shorting HEX, and their collateral, which was USDC, was used to go buy the HEX that they owed off the market, and subsequently they moved the price up a little bit. So
thank you for your sacrifice, Dylan. Appreciate you doing a dry run on that one.
Wasn't me.
Or was it actually Peter McCormick? Which one?
Wasn't me. It was just some random dude, man. You can check my account. I have it publicly. The account I'm on right now. My ass did not get liquidated, and I opened up a short and front ran some dumper, emergency unstaked 30 million HEX, and he dumped all of it. So I got a nice 10% profit on that, actually. So yeah.
Right. So that's a good case study. Like how much X's did you go? Can you tell us about that? And like this great case study, I think.
Yeah, so I just used 50% of my my bag here to short. I didn't, lever up or anything like that. I just It was just 50% of my bag. Open up a short. Like I'll open up a short for you now, actually, because I tried to do it
live. I like it.
I tried to do it on Crypto Cabana, but my transaction got stuck when I was depositing some USDC.
Triple that gas. All right.
Yeah, exactly. This time. So I'm going to borrow 50,000 HEX against my 6,000 USDC. Okay. When you do this stuff, you have to pay attention to your health factor. Okay. Your health factor is basically how close you are to being liquidated. Okay. So the lower the number goes, if it goes below 1, you start to be put up for liquidation. Okay. And what'll happen is your collateral will start to be sold off until 1, your loan is no longer worth more than your collateral. Okay. So, or your collateralization level, or 2, you're completely liquidated. Right. So there's a certain point where if you're down a certain amount on your loan versus your collateral, it'll just liquidate everything all at once. Okay. But if it's, like at 99 or 0.99 for your health factor, it'll just it'll shim off or shave off a little bit of your collateral to pay back the loan until it goes back above 1, right? So keep that in mind. The higher, the better, okay? And so I'm going to borrow, and I'm going to make sure that so I'm borrowing 50K HEX, which is $2,800, and I'm going to make sure it's aggressive. Here we go. And we're going to wait for that to go through. So, but essentially what I did, again, I have $6,000 as collateral. Okay. I can borrow 75% of that. So I'm borrowing, instead of maxing out my position, which would get me closer to a liquidation price, which I don't want to happen. I borrowed a little bit, maybe about half of my position to open up a short, right? So now once this goes through, okay, so it just went through. I'm going to go to Uniswap. All right. I go to HEX. I want USDC. I click max. And I then swap for USDC, and I would officially be short. Just like that.
Wow.
It's just that easy.
And is it so that's one way to short. Are there other like on the platform, would you always do it like this, or is there other ways to like use leverage and stuff like that? Like it's just
okay, so there are ways to lever up a lot, which I'm not smart enough to do, because you need to know how to do flash loans. Okay, which you can do flash loans with this just like you can with Aave. And essentially it would look something like you borrow, you deposit, then you borrow, then you redeposit like a derivative, like on Aave, you would redeposit your P USDC or your Aave A USDC, okay, and then and then you basically are borrowing against your collateral and then redepositing it again and then borrowing again. Kind of, it's very complicated. And you know, you can try this with Furu combo on Aave, but you know they don't soon they'll support us, but they haven't supported us yet. But anyways, and then you would get levered exposure to whatever you're trying to trade. Okay, but you know, shit like that, I would probably I'd probably stay away from, and just, you know, at that point on PulseChain, you just use famous, right? That's easy. You click a button, you click how much leverage you want, and you press long or short. It's really easy. And that's extremely complicated versus, yeah. And in your leverage, you're only getting maybe 3x, 5x, and it's too much work for doing that type of stuff, right? So
just to recap on this one, so you borrowed HEX and then you sold it on the market for USDC.
That's right.
And then, so what is the plan for this? Like, how is this how would this be a strategy someone would do? Like,
so,
I'm not saying, like, you shouldn't. I'm not saying we should short HEX. Like everyone says, don't do that. But just in general, people who have this in mind because they want to short HEX, what's going through their mind? Like, how do you actually end to end? How does this complete?
Yeah. So to complete the you know, you're short here, right? So you just rebuy your HEX, right? So if I try and do it right now, not only am I gonna owe more HEX by the time depending on how long you open your loan, right? And depending on how my camera died, sorry, but depending on how long you're holding up your loan or anything, will depend on how much you owe back, right? So if the price falls dramatically, then the HEX that you're rebuying is much cheaper, and you don't have to buy as much back, right? So let's say you were trying to get like a 100% return on your short. You literally have to wait till HEX went to near zero to get 100%, right? So, you know, you're skimming at this point, right? So you're not getting like, you know, 10,000% return for shorting HEX to zero. Like, that's not going to happen. You know, this is a low leverage thing that you're using, right? Whereas if the price goes up against you, you know, your collateral is then used to go buy the HEX at a higher price than you thought possible, which, you know, then pushes up the price higher, which if there's, you know, multiple shorts open, that could cause a cascade of liquidations, right? And then same thing goes for going long as well. You know, if the price falls and you're long HEX, then, you know, you get liquidated, then you push the price down a little bit more, and then perhaps you liquidate the next guy, and then et cetera, right? But I think on a natural market situation, you'll probably see that using the leverage kind of evens the market out and causes a little bit less volatility, because, you know, you have people basically pointing a gun at each other, right? Like, okay, well, what are you going to do? Well, you know, they got their gun pointed at this other guy, and well, what is he going to do? And then they got their guns pointing back at you, and like, what are you going to do? And et cetera. And so they're all kind of, you know, hesitantly pointing up leverage to see who's going to make the first move, you know, and then buying back in when that move happens, or, you know, selling when that move happens, et cetera, to lock in their profits and whatnot. So, you know, I think the market evens out more so than it does get more volatile with the leverage and whatnot. But I'm ranting.
So interesting.
No worries. Do you have something, Graphics?
Well, I was going to ask, I remember Buck talking about this a while ago. I was watching him talk about shorts, and I think the conversation I'm really interested to hear from you as well is talking about, he specifically was talking about how using a short position during like a bear market to as like more of like a safety net in terms of using a small part of your position to go short. And if the price goes down, you capitalize on it. And if the price goes back up, I can't remember how he was describing it, but there was like a non-trader's like looking at this from more of like an opportunistic in a short window kind of perspective to a opportunistic longer time horizon. I remember what he was, I can't exactly remember how he was talking about it, but it was really interesting. Do you know what I'm referring to here?
Yep, it's called hedging. And that would be a fantastic thing to do on Famous, right? So on this, you know, you're affecting the spot price, okay? But you're mostly probably going to be using this to, let's say, borrow, you know, ETH and HEX, and then depositing it into like a pair, okay, like a liquidity pair or something like that, right? And then paying off your loans as you get the APY, okay? Or, you know, say you're, you know, depositing HEX and then, you know, just providing liquidity versus some stable coins or something like that. I don't know, but that's probably what you are going to mainly be using this, you know, fiat for, right? However, for what you're describing is a hedge, which you can do here, but you just can't lever up like you can on Famous, which is much easier to open up a levered short position with a portion of your bag to protect against downside risk if you think the market is getting frothy. So you wouldn't be hedging yourself at the bottom. That's probably not a good idea. You would probably want to do that when you know, you see people dancing on coffins and shit like that, right? That's probably when you want to open up. Okay, all right, well, I'm going to use 1% of my bag here because, you know, hey, if people are doing some crazy shit where, you know, it's maybe a top signal, you know, I lever up 10x, then if it starts to go down, then I'm okay with my HEX stakes continuing to stay there. I open up a short, I'm good, right? I'm not getting, you know, negative 50% now. Maybe I'm only down, you know, 20% or 30% at that point, right? Because I opened up a short. And then inversely, if you're at the bottom and you think that the market may fall more, so you're not completely convinced, so you don't deploy your capital, but just to protect against the upside, you open up a levered long with a portion of your bag. So, you know, if the market starts to double like it did, you know, at the 1.8 area, and then, you know, we went up to 13 cents basically, you know, that long would have basically had your average price, if you decided to FOMO buy back in, it would have been less of a shock than if you didn't have that long opened at the time, right? So, you know, those are just excellent ways to hedge with Famous, right? You can do this, you know, longing with leverage is a lot easier than, in my opinion, shorting with leverage. I wouldn't short with leverage on this, but you can. But, you know, I would rather long with leverage. You know, if I think it's a bottom and I'm certain, I would use, you know, fiat to open up a leverage long, which Buck opened up a leverage long on HEX actually recently. So, you know.
Well, how would we open just a regular long? So, I mean, so when Buck did it, that was on PulseChain testnet, I guess.
No, this was on mainnet.
Oh, so I mean, on Ethereum mainnet.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah.
So it would just basically, are you guys familiar with like the haunted strat?
Yeah. Sort of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So basically you do that where, you know, you deposit your HEX, you borrow a stable coin, you deposit the HEX you just bought onto to fiat, then you borrow more stable coins, then you deposit more HEX after you buy it, right, etc. And then, you know, eventually you get really close to where you can't do anything, and then that's when, you know, it's very dangerous, but it's very possible for you to do. I'm not going to do that with a short, but you could.
So you borrow, so you buy HEX and deposit it, and then you lost me on that. So wouldn't it just be the opposite of what you just did? Wouldn't it be like,
yep,
or something like that?
Yeah. So what I did now was I went short. Okay. So that looks like me depositing a stable coin or any other coin that's not HEX, and then I borrow HEX and sell it. And if I sell it for the thing that I originally deposited, you know, I could deposit the thing I just sold my HEX for again onto fiat and go borrow more HEX and then sell it again, et cetera, et cetera. But you're getting to where you're getting more exposed to price, and, you know, you're more likely to be liquidated at that point, right? the inverse
So-
of that is, go ahead.
I was going to say, so basically what you're saying is the deposit side is like basically, so what you're borrowing is what you're expecting to decrease in price relative to your deposit. Your deposit side is essentially going to increase in ratio to what the value of what you're borrowing is.
Precisely. So I think HEX is going to go down,
Right.
right? So, I deposited a stable coin, which I don't think is going to go down. And then I sold the HEX that I borrowed, and I'm waiting for it to go down in price so I can buy it back at a lower price than I sold it for. And then I can pay off my loan. So it makes I lost my mic. Does that make sense?
But if you're longing HEX, I guess
It's the opposite. You deposit your HEX, then you borrow USDC, you go buy more HEX.
And you go buy more HEX. That's the key piece.
Yep.
Okay, gotcha.
Yep.
Because HEX is going to go up in value relative to the USDC.
Exactly. Because then
Right.
to pay back your loan, you have to go and sell your HEX back for USDC.
So when HEX price, so the working out scenario is if you're right and HEX price goes up, then you can just pay off your loan and you got a profit.
Exactly. Yeah. You remember, because HEX went up in price, so now you don't have to sell as much HEX to pay back your loan. So you get to keep the HEX that you have as profit, right? And then you pay back your USDC, and then now you can free up your collateral, right? Which is HEX in that situation.
Perfect. Love it. We'll do one more question on, let's see. So I had a few questions on Fiat. One more before we move on. This is amazing though, Dylan. Like, you guys have done a really good job with this. And it is the bank in like a very cool way of saying the bank for PulseChain. Like,
Oh yeah.
I've got one question whenever we get a chance. I want to hear you. All right, you go first, bro.
Go for it.
My man.
No,
sure.
I was just gonna pick one out of the chat. I just didn't want to ignore chat, but yeah, go for it. And we'll take one from the chat after yours.
What do you think is what do you think, just on side of PulseChain, what is the greatest benefit to the ecosystem that Fiat brings to the table, or maybe the largest couple benefits to the ecosystem?
Sure.
A handful.
I think the ability to hedge your positions and borrow against your HEX or Hedron is a very valuable thing that we haven't seen the outcomes of yet, right? So I think that since in this last cycle we only had the ability to sell your HEX for cash that you needed, right? Whereas now you don't have to sell your HEX for cash. You could just deposit and borrow the cash, which is a great innovation that we're coming out of the Stone Age and we're starting to go into the age of, okay, I'm going to build a house now and I'm going to live in a house instead of living in a cave. You know what I mean? So it could turn out to be a situation where HEX could have more upside potential than it would have had without this sort of platform, right? I also think that being able to borrow and perhaps provide more liquidity that you may not have at the moment, right? So let's say you have a lot of stable coins at the moment, right? But you don't have any Pulse or PulseX. Okay, that's a pretty terrible situation, right? But you want to provide liquidity for Pulse and PulseX because it's printing tons of incentive token relative to the amount or the price you would pay to borrow the Pulse and PulseX, and you kind of still want to sit in your stable coins or something like that, right? Then you can borrow Pulse and PulseX, deposit it in the liquidity pool, and let that baby ride, right? And pay off your loan as it goes, right? You could do this if you only had Pulse, and you take half your bag, you borrow PulseX, you go deposit it in the liquidity pool, and you pay your loan off with the incentive token, right? If there's a dip versus Pulse and PulseX again, right? And you don't want to completely get rid of your Pulse, right? But you think that PulseX is going to run, or things like this, you could, for instance, you could borrow you could borrow a stable coin and then buy PulseX versus your Pulse. You could do something like that, right? And then you would get the exposure for PulseX that's a little bit complicated, but definitely something you can do, right? If you're strapped for cash at the moment, right? But yeah, I mean, there's tons of ways you can use this stuff, right? It just depends on how much you want to learn about it, and if you want to take the opportunities that are presented, right? So.
Last question from UFO to go. Dylan, will flash loans affect spot prices on PulseX, allowing arbitrage trades to proceed? When will flash loans be activated on Fiat?
So flash loans are available now, right? So if you want to use flash loans on ETH, you can right now. As soon as the platform is up on PulseChain, you'll be able to do flash loans, right? You just got to know how to code them and things like this. But yeah, definitely. I know a couple of people that'll be running flash loans to even out the market prices. But yep.
Cool.
Awesome. Well, it looks like our last gentleman of the day is here. Welcome to the show, Walrus.
There you go.
What's up? Hey, gentlemen. Just a minor issue. Just a minor issue of no voice, wrong time, storm, studio won't come up. Other than that, everything's good.
Did you were you on 1+ hour? I mean, you're exactly on time if you were thinking it was at 5 o'clock Pacific or 8 o'clock Eastern.
Yeah, that's what it was. Just I was in Florida for a week and a half. I just wasn't thinking twice, man. So sorry about the late interruption, guys.
No worries. Well, we just had an amazing demo from Dylan on Fiat. Super cool. We were talking about before that a few different strategies, a few different things around like what is some no-brainer moves, how to think about ratios, how to cold wallet stuff. I had just one for you that that I have my notes too. I want to give you a scenario and see, like, speaking of PulseChain launch, talking about strategies and things like that. Let's say, again, just pure speculation, just take a scenario here to get your thoughts. Let's say PulseChain does a 30x in 30 days. That'd be, popping champagne, everything's amazing, whatever. No idea if it's going to happen. It's purely hypothetical. And liquid loans, other products and stuff are alive. How does one perform a never selling? Maybe they want to take 10% of their bag, profit from their bag. What scenarios make the most sense to do around that with somebody in that position?
Yeah. So when I did catch just the little bit at the end there, Dylan, man, the team did great, man. So congrats on the launch, and it's very, very cool to see that stuff. I saw you guys post that the first HEX short got liquidated, all that kind of good stuff, man. So congrats, and always happy to have people building cool stuff in the ecosystem. So glad that everything went well, man.
Appreciate that, man. Yeah.
Okay. So assuming you kind of get on the 30x, there's a variety of the different tools, and it really kind of depends like what you're actually trying to achieve. So I think too often whenever we're looking at some of the collateral ratios that we look at, it's like, hey, what will protect me against any dip ever, no matter whatever happens? That's probably not really the best way to use a lot of them. I think in general, the better way to use the tool is, what am I just trying to do? I think sometimes we view it where it's a solution in search of a problem rather than the other way around. It's like, what problem do you actually have you're trying to achieve, right? So if you're, rather than profit taking, you're trying to generate yield. So I think that for the most part, the big value is, once you have that kind of evaluation, is that you can actually be more aggressive than people would think as far as actual collateral ratio. But it's because you're maintaining a position, right? So if you're using it for some of the stuff that like Dylan and these guys are building, or you're in the stability pool, you're providing liquidity, to me, a lot of that advantages, you could definitely use it as a way to scrape and maintain price exposure. But to me, it's a way to take that value, maintain your price exposure to Pulse, and then generate yields in a variety of these ways. That's where I think the real value is. So I think that more people, especially give someone like Dylan the tool, these guys, Dylan's not going to look at this and go, if I set it at XYZ ratio, it's never going to get liquidated. That's not what he's doing. It would look aggressive as far as what you'd see on chain, but it's because he's using that value for something, and he'll just keep topping up that position to maintain something. So most people will either use it as more of a market making side. They want to generate USDL for a variety of different yield bearing. They want to be able to take it, take some level of profit. Again, there's a dip on any of these other things and you move in. That's where that stuff kills it. So to me, again, the first part is, what are we trying to do? But I think most people using it correctly will be, that ratio will be more aggressive than kind of what gets tossed around, because I don't need to have 90% of my bag just being dormant capital sitting there. I can be, take a much, much higher position, but it's because I'm maintaining it, right? So I think sometimes we almost kind of confuse some of those positions with like the methodology that we think of in HEX, where it's like, all right, I want a bunch of yield, set it, and I'll come back and get it later. You want to, I think that most of these tools you want to use in a little different way. So the framing is the first part. What are we actually trying to get down?
Yeah, I've been trying to come up with these. I'm trying to think of the most helpful way to help people figure it out. Maybe, I mean, even we learn stuff ourselves around this. Somebody had a funny comment earlier that we were talking about what I say, like any like no-brainer things, and somebody said like Max is trying to get some degen moves going out of these guys. And I'm like, I mean, I think everyone's interested in these type of scenarios where you can look at and see, you know, based on your own plan, based on you know, how much you have and what you're trying to do with it, your time horizon. Everyone's trying to figure out like what to do. And when it, you know, Mike Tyson, everyone's got a plan until you get punched in the face. We're going to get punched in the face. It's coming, people. It's coming. And I want to be as ready as everyone else. So that maybe we can talk about that a little bit too. I'll frame it like, how do you, you know, we talked about a little bit before of different, you know, maybe different ways of knowing when to sell, knowing kind of based on your personal plan. But that's what I wanted to ask you too, is how do you take profit? Like, how do you take profit in the ecosystem? We do a 10X in the first month, 10X in the first week, 10X first day. A lot of people are like, what do I do? I want to sell, but I don't know what to do. That's what made me think of liquid loans and other products like that, where you can mint stables. But like, how do you do? Like, what can people do in the ecosystem when they're faced with these decisions?
So this is something where you guys ever seen that movie Yes Man with Jim Carrey?
Yes.
Yeah, he gets triggered and says yes. I like to use that movie as an example for that's why RH tells everybody to never sell. Or even, you know, even like our moniker. We're going to sell and take some profit, right? But most people sell so much faster and flip around and trade so much more often that you almost have to say yes to everything and then back into some no's. So it's almost like Yes Man. He's just like, nope, we're going to say yes to life and just never sell, never, ever, ever, ever hold. We're holding. Because everybody's so far on the other end of the spectrum that's how you pull them into where they should be, right? So I think that in this ecosystem, especially, like you'll see that move on, and it's something that people, if they say got burned a lot and then we're in HEX, if they're going to be in a variety of other projects, stuff's going to fail. Like there's just going to be stuff that doesn't hit as well. There's going to be stuff that doesn't perform as well. So you're just going to see that not everything you hold is going to 1000x, right? Like that's just the case of these things, right? Like this isn't meant to be like cold water and all the cool stuff that everybody's building and things we're participating in. But a lot of times, most coins don't 1000x. So you want to take some profit along the way. And if you don't take profit, then you don't have an opportunity to load back your position. So if you just kind of look at the HEX chart, which is what, you know, again, most of the audience understands, if you took no profit at 30 cents and you took none at 35 and none at 40 and 45 and 50, then you didn't get an opportunity to basically 10x that bag if you took that value you took and then buy back at 3, 4, 5, and 6 cents, right? So it's you want to basically approach them the same. We think we have a good idea on how buying now. You know, you hear like DCA much more common. So you do the same thing at the top, right? Like you don't have to hit the top and hit 56 cents. If you would have missed it by 30% and took out at 35 cents, you'd be buying 7x your bag back now. Like you could buy all that percentage back. Or, you know, again, we look at just lowering, you know, again, we talk about that math a lot on DCA, and then we see that, you know, if you buy at 50 and then you buy at 5, okay, well now your actual, you know, your cost basis is 11 cents. It's not 25. It moves it down an order of magnitude. And so you get that same, basically that math is reversed when it comes to DCAing out. So, I mean, there's a lot of ways to do those things, and people just need to get an idea of, you know, some certain thresholds about, okay, like what am I really trying to achieve here? You know, how much do they want to be hands-on? So sometimes that's the reason I feel like most of us probably, when we speak to people individually, so if the three of us were sitting, we could have a little different conversation. We'd all have a little different idea about what the other ones are trying to achieve, because we're trying to condense the language down, right? So, you know, again, if someone you just told to onboard just got online, they got MetaMask, this is not the conversation, right? Like then we're not going to be trying to explain to them how to use 4 or 5 DeFi protocols, right? So understanding where they're at. So I think for most people, the first one of like, if you're like deer in the headlights, it's funny, like you get in or you get out the same way you came in. DCA, when you start to see this thing be up and you're up 10x, like 10x has gotten, we're like desensitized to what 10x means. It's 1,000% return. When's the last time anyone hit that anywhere else? Okay. that's fine to take profit. It's fine to take some of that bag off at 10x. Like that's a lick. Like you 10x your money, right? So it doesn't mean you get out of the game, but you get out the same way you got in. So I think for most people, the first part is just start with some DCA approaches. That's the easiest thing. And then that next tier, like, okay, I've got it. And you're understanding some thresholds. You have some goal set. You have other income streams outside of crypto, especially if we're talking about someone who's making 50K and now they're sitting here looking at a bag that's 50, 100, 300K. It's value they haven't had sitting there. You probably have stuff to do with that. And so you want to open up other revenue streams. Are you really trying to go be a deca millionaire and move these things around? So then you're looking at not just how do I sell and take profit, but am I looking at moving that profit into something else that's more valuable? Are you going to try and go into a more aggressive project, take something else on the chain? Are you actually going to go buy risk? Like, what are we actually trying to achieve with profit? Like, are you just trying to go buy the Rolex? Like, okay, well, I mean, again, you could take a percentage of your bag there. So the first part, again, just putting some framing around the question a bit, right? But the first part is you get out how you got in. Start with DCA and take some approach. Realize that when you start to get a hockey stick, or actually, I think it was Dylan's buddy Buck that was when I started seeing people dancing on coffins, I thought it was time to take profit. Like
coffins have been mentioned on the stream yet? Yes, it's a great phrase. Yeah,
the coffin.
And so
always a time.
Yeah, and again, that doesn't mean that like the first bit of euphoria, you're like, that's it, pull it. When you just eject out of the plane, it's like, and even when people talk about like buying and selling. I think when people are coming from, if you're coming from like, hey, you got $5,000, you got 10 grand, we kind of think of that like your bag is like all like one thing. Whereas as that stuff grows, like you think about having positions, we still use bags kind of colloquially, but like you have positions, right? So, if you have 10 grand, yeah, you DCA in some of that, but you kind of just have a spot, right? But you catch a 30x on that. Now you have 300K. Embedding, we call this units, right? So you went from having 10 units, which means you're kind of just in or you're out, right? If you have 300K, you have 300 units. That means you can now move around and and 3K is 1%. So you can say, hey, I'm going to take 1% move here. That's a unit, right? So as these bags grow, especially as people are going to hit, especially if they're in a handful of projects, so if you did well in HEX and now you're in all these things and this is about to be that bull run that's going to really elevate where you're at, your unit sizes get smaller. So you can say, hey, I'm going to DCA, and it's not, again, say 10, 20, 30%, it's 1%, it's 5%. You start making smaller moves and moving these things out. And so if you take, again, just some rough math, you got $500,000, if you sit here and you move out a few positions at a couple of percent, you end up taking out 50K. Then there's a 60% correction. Now look at what you could put that back. You could hold on 20, 30K and almost buy the entire position back now because you basically, again, you came out the same way you came in. So it's bite sizes and having some framing. I think that's the first part for people when they're like, what do I do with this stuff when it comes in? That's the first one is what else are you doing? Why do you need the funds? And then again, that DCA approach to smooth it out. And then from there, that's when you can start to add some of that literacy about, hey, okay, now my tax bill actually matters, right? Like, you made 50K, 60K, like, are you going to go through that many steps? Probably not. You're going to do some basic things and try to minimize it. You make 500K, you're trying to cash that out and take a 15, 20% capital gains. Okay, now we got some planning to do, right? So it's all these things, right? It just takes time to level those things up. And so it's when we talk about profit, a lot of it is just like it's much more holistic. Like, what are we actually doing? Like, again, are you just going to go buy the Ferrari? Cool. I mean, there's ways to do that, and then you can start to use things like LL and Fiat to actually maximize that price exposure and to do other things. So if you're talking about taking profit because you want to start adding on yield, great. That's what these tools are for. If you're talking about taking profit, then you can open up position, and then you can even look at, okay, I'm willing to sell right now, and you want to catch out a big bag, right? You can still use some of these protocols and say, okay, I'm going to be aggressive. And it's almost like, hey, I'm going to take the collateral difference, or I have to go look at what the settings would be on Fiat and say, okay, if it goes up, if I basically take this route and it goes up, I'm still in. And if it goes down the way I expected, I'm basically willing to take that buffer on the chance that it goes up and I keep exposure. So there's a huge variety of ways you can use these tools.
What do you think? I mean, there's one that's been thrown around too, like 10, 10, 50. So on every 10x, sell 10% up to 50% of your bag within, whatever time frame, 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, whatever it is. Are those types of strategies, like, I guess, are there advantages to those versus other ones you thought about too, or is that one crazy? Like, how do you feel about that kind of DCAing, DC outing?
Yeah, right. So most of those strategies are really just trying to condense a lot of information into something that makes sense. So again, they're basically saying that same thing. It's a little tweaking variation between, okay, take some value because you got a bunch, right? And I don't really follow any like set in stone of these number profiles. And part of that is because just in my own personal life over this last like 5 years, kind of what I've really been trying to achieve has kind of evolved. So that process of like, okay, now I'm trying to actually keep a lot of this value in crypto has shifted a bunch. But they're just trying to communicate that same thing of like, hey, you went up 10x, maybe we should take some chips off the table, right? Like that's what all those strategies are communicating. So if those are a good frame of reference to start there, it gives you like a mental model to work through. It doesn't take a lot of bandwidth. And then again, as you add some clarity and spend time in the ecosystem, you can like for TA, I talk about TA. So I don't just look at a chart, go through TA, and I'm like, this is it. Here's all my money. What I do is if I'm DCAing in or out, I'll try to add some clarity to the chart. So, okay, so we're taking the 10, 10, 50, right? Okay, so we're at 10, 10, 50. All right, here's my first 10x. Now I look at the chart and I'm sitting there thinking, and I'm like, man, this thing is still loaded. All right, maybe I'll adjust it. I'll take out 7%, right? I'll take 7% out rather than that 10% and just see how it rolls. So I'll use like TA, these other factors to basically adjust kind of a strategy I already had in place. So that's where I think the TA gets, people use it correctly, and then people look at it the wrong way and they kind of like talk at each other rather than to each other. So you can take any of these strategies and be like, okay, this framework makes sense for where I'm at, where I think my bags will play. Now, what actually happens, right? So I'm going to start with 10, 10, 50 makes great. Let's start there. That's a good one. All right, we hit that 10x and we're like, hang on, this happened in, if it happened in 2 days, it's probably going to be a correction, right? So we can still have a strategy, but let's look at this like, hey, this is probably going to correct really rough. It doesn't just hockey stick up forever, right? If it hits that first 10x in say 90 days, well, we probably saw a bit of an S and now it's probably on a slow. Maybe you want to skip the first one because it's a brand new project. There's all this bullishness, Maybe Elon changes the Twitter icon to a hexagon and you're like, okay, maybe I want to hold into this one, right? So then you start with that 10, 10, 20, 10, 10, 50, and then you take X, you basically say, okay, this is where I'm at unless I have huge reasons to deviate, or, hey, I'm loaded up, I'm going to take a play. So I start with 10, 10, 50, hit the 10X, and then I look around, I'm like, hey, I don't need any of this yet. I don't really feel like there's much of a correction. I'll just take 5% on the first one. All right, 5% is off the back. I'm wrong. Either way, I'm not huge wrong over what I would have done. And if I'm right, cool, that it adds some clarity. So I like to have those approaches of like, I start with a quote, a line. I'm like, all right, this roughly makes sense. Boom. And then we're just adding clarity, adding tools. As you're waiting on your first 10X, go look at Fiat, go look at LL, go look at all the cool stuff people are building. See which one of these you're most likely to use, which one speaks to you. Start trying to figure out, use it correctly. The test nets will still be up. So even after mainnet, all our stuff will still be on testnet. Go play with the stuff on testnet and keep getting these strategies figured out. That way, when you hit your 10X, you say, okay, that was my plan. Here's my move. Do I make any adjustments? Do I want to use a tool, or do I not feel comfortable with them and I just want to take value out? And you just keep adding and it just never stops.
Sounds like another tagline for a product that keeps adding and never stops. Hashtag never
That's
sell.
it. Never sell.
I like it. I wanted to pose a question too, something circle back to Dylan kind of briefly spoke on earlier as well, on PulseChain. Could be, maybe I'll frame the question like this. We'll start with graphics. What is the case for and against a PulseChain dump after launch, and what time frame? And you can go into whatever specifics you want to go to, or whatever you think is a good point.
Oh God, I hate this question. There's so much to it. It's crazy. I mean, my biggest thing is like, I just don't know how liquidity is going to look. And that's my biggest thing is like, if liquidity is thin, oh God, like it's going to be a mess, at least in my mind. And it's not going to take much in terms of people telling profits to keep us down for a bit anyways. I really think that when it comes to selling us down, it's going to be, or sorry, say that question one more time for me. I got lost in my own little world here. Say it one more time for me.
So the case for and against there being a dump, and what time frame for PulseChain after launch?
Right. Okay. Case for a dump. I guess the case for a dump would be we start higher than sack rate, people FOMO in or right off the get-go, price runs up, everyone's up like 10x on their sack or more based on when they got in. So like 12, 13, 14x up, and we come crashing right back down. And I think the case for us not dumping, one of the things I've been thinking about recently is, okay, so this incentive token is an interesting play. And we've been seeing these 40x, 50x, or 40x multipliers on the incentive token. And I think that if you can get enough people to be overly incentivized to not sell their tokens and to provide liquidity, so that way any impermanent loss that they would even receive would be completely obliterated by the amount of profit they'd be in for getting the incentive token, I think you could see more liquidity, which would mitigate some of the volatility, and B, you'd see less of a sell-off. Because if you can maybe get some impermanent loss, or if you get even like a fairly significant impermanent loss because of some volatility, but the incentive token is so stupidly high in your return, I mean, hell, I'd even possibly consider that, and because if you can make a profit while you should technically be losing, I mean, you're still in a profit regardless of, you can always just buy back in, for a lot of people, that's going to make a lot of sense. And so I think if that's the case, that could prevent a dump as well. But then it just comes down for me to the unknown unknowns. And at the end of the day, I don't have a damn clue what's going to happen. And I don't pretend like I have a clue. There's just so much that I can't account for, that I think what we all expect is going to happen is not going to happen. And I think we're going to get surprised ultimately. And I know it's kind of outside the answer. It's not like an answer without being an answer fully, but I don't know how to give an actual answer to that. Honestly, I really don't.
I got a good one for this.
Go for it, Dylan.
Yeah. So, you guys got to remember when the sacrifices happened, right? So both for Pulse and PulseX, they happened near the top, right? So people don't know that they're down yet. You sacrificed HEX at 20 cents. Okay. It's at 6 cents now. That's a huge difference, right? There's a lot less value you can extract out of HEX now than you could at 20 cents. Okay. And people don't realize that they're actually down at the moment, right? So PulseChain is, in my eyes, you guys should be prepared mentally for a dip more so than a 10x or this exuberant entrance in the PulseChain, right? You guys should just naturally get ready for the thing that you are not expecting to happen, which is a dip. Like, nobody apparently thinks a dip is coming or that's going to happen. But I mean, rationally speaking, you guys sacrificed at the top. There's a lot more value you can extract at a 60% now than HEX at 20 cents, and it's at 6 cents now, right? So I would mentally prepare for some sort of dip, just naturally, instead of like, oh my God, I'm down 50%. Oh my God, this is going to zero and I'm selling everything now. Don't do that, right? Prepare yourself for that situation so you don't do the bad thing, which is, oh my God, I'm selling everything before I go to zero. You know what I mean? So I think, that's probably what you guys should be doing, right? And it's just more naturally probably going to be a dip, right? We're still not in a bull market yet, right? People are extracting value out of HEX, even though the mainnet is right around the corner. Okay, that should tell you something, right? It's not to go without saying. So, yeah,
we're going to circle back to why people are selling HEX too, because that is a question I've been getting like every day. But
I think I got a great idea about that as well. So, hey.
Let's go into it. Let's go into it now, and then we'll hit Walrus for the dump question as well. But yeah, while you're on a roll, Dylan, go for it.
Sure. With that being said, the dip question, some bigger guys have been getting out of HEX. Why, you may ask? Well, why would they sell their copy? It's a fantastic question, because we've all been told, okay, yeah, buy your HEX for the PulseChain copy, so you get double your HEX, right? Well, what happens if it's cheaper to buy PulseChain when the bridges are open? Then what? Like, what are you gonna do? You're stuck with the your PP in your hand, right? So the bigger guys have been exiting their HEX position, I'm assuming, for this situation, right? So I think that's just another further reason why we're more likely to have a dip, just in general, than a 10x pump or something like this. So that's what I think.
Yeah, I keep saying too, I think people are voting with their money. I don't think that they think we're close enough to PulseChain launch yet.
Oh, yeah, that too.
If we were, it goes against all conventional wisdom in the world to not, at least sell HEX. You can be neutral, but like if you're not buying it, if you're selling it, the conventional wisdom is if you buy it, you get the copy, you get the free thing, and then you can do what you want afterwards. So apparently people don't think we're that close to PulseChain launch. They haven't seen whatever indicator they're looking for in order to say, hey, price looks good, maybe the bottom's in, whatever data they're going off of, and then buy it up into launch.
Yeah. And I mean, I've been tracking, we have a chat where we track a shitload of bigger guys, right? And a lot of them have more HEX than they know what to do with, okay? And it looks like they're just getting cash ready on hand. And then they still have, shark positions, dolphin positions, and they're still just waiting, right? But they are getting out and they are getting cash in hand. So I don't know, maybe that continues. Maybe it doesn't, but it might be a hedge in case that there is a dip, to have cash on hand to buy the dip with stables, which it's not a bad idea. So I don't know, that's what I've been noticing.
How that kind of dovetails into HEX. Say
Can I jump on that one real quick?
Yes. Sorry, Waller. So there's so many good questions from this. But yes. Yeah.
No worries, man. So graphics, when we did our stream, what was that, a year ago? When I was like, maybe you should hold stables.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about that. Yeah, we talked about the same issue. So there's a variety of like things that can come up with like holding HEX. One is, again, if your exposure is to that event, then you can't opportunistically take advantage of it, like Dylan's talking about. So if you just assume that one of these things is going to dip, all right, I'm just going to hold dry powder, let you guys go sell whichever one. Like when everyone asks, like, hey, like which one am I going to buy at launch? Whichever one you guys don't want. Exactly. I like all of them. I'm just going to buy whichever one's cheap. I don't care. It doesn't really matter to me. HEX, any of these things. Again, so do I know? Because I don't know which one's going to outperform which. I assume they're all going to go up. So I'm not that confident in my evaluation. I just take the cheap one. Like this is just basic market 101. Like that's data science 101. Just you guys pick. I'll just take the cheap one. You guys can, because what you're looking at from a probabilistic or like a sports betting, or again, it depends on these terms. I like to use other words and then it makes more sense for certain people, is when those things come out, if you buy the expensive one, what you're saying is that you're willing to buy the premium on your evaluation that you're right. I'm not. I'm just going to take the cheap one and trust that they all go up. So I'll have an allocation that spreads across. But again, if you're holding stables, do we think HEX dumps? Everyone wants to jump into PX? Maybe. Maybe PX dumps because there's so many people holding it only so they can move their copy over. There's a variety of sport things, but if I'm sitting here in all of them, then I can't take advantage of that. And I don't really want to move one of these assets around. If I just got a big pile of powder, I just start blowing stuff up when everybody else starts to panic and move and adjust their position around. So especially when you look at the copies, I don't want to go down we can go down the math a little bit, but it spins people out. But essentially, if you look at the copies are worth sort of like at SAC value of like Pulse and PulseX and these things. So like to kind of make a dollar equivalence, they're worth only like 5 to 8% or so at launch. Yep. So the principle has always been infinitely more important to protect, which is what me and Graphics talked about a long, long time ago. This wasn't me being like, hey guys, don't buy HEX. I've bought tons of HEX since then. Not to buy PHEX. It's, hey, the magic here is in protecting the principle, and it almost always is. Protect your principle and then make some decisions. So if you were buying HEX or like PHEX because you're like, hey, in 2 years after launch, PHEX is the greatest thing ever. Cool, makes sense. Keep loading up. That's fine. If you're like, hey, how do I opportunistically take advantage of these opportunities? Stablecoins, I think, have been the play for a long time. Like that's something that we've really tried to bring up for another small one again before we just move on is I feel like it's almost like a public service announcement. If anyone has looked on V3 or V4 at the HEX PLS pair, and then you realize how many people are going to hit that pair the first 48 hours, that thing is going to explode, implode, explode, implode. That thing is going to have the mother of all wicks and bank runs. Just be careful with that pair. If you're having to listen to any of the stuff that any of these guys are talking about, and you're not 100% sure, leave it alone. Do not touch that pair. There'll be other stuff that moves around you can play, but that one's going to be especially thin. and it's going to be probably the most interacted with besides maybe PLSX. So don't do that. Do not do that.
Yeah, if you don't know what's going on, you're someone else's profit margin. So
Yeah.
If you don't know who the sucker is at the table,
I was gonna say,
you're
yeah, or you're sitting next to them. One of those.
There's a small joke. I'll get this out real quick. Then I'll promise to get off the mic. A guy who was a mentor of mine for a long time, who was a pretty rough guy, but I absolutely love him. But sometimes when you hear other people coaching, a lot of us do try to put out good information, but just for just to take some framing around a lot of the advice and some of the things that other people say. There was an expression that if you give a man a fish, you feed him for a day, right? Well, if you teach a man to fish, you're an effing idiot. You just ruin the market for everybody. Don't teach people to fish. They're your buyers, right? So like some of the stuff to be careful and like think through some of the stuff and remember that like, hey, what am I trying to accomplish? What are the people who are speaking to me to accomplish? So there's a lot there. So just take stuff slow. And in general, unless you know what's going on, just do nothing. Like if you just stick around, don't screw up your principal and stay in the game, you're likely to be better off in 2 years.
That toxic capitalism is killing me right now, Walrus. So one more on, actually, I think it's a more important question. And we kind of touched on it earlier, though, but I had a couple from Dylan's. You guys are, by the way, amazing. Like my head is just going on all these different directions on these questions. I'm really trying to cover as much as we can, but there's like so much going on, so many good threads to go down, trying to pick the best one to at least as best I can. However, as I said, we touched on this a little bit earlier with graphics and Dylan, but what do you say to the people who, who are on board with the narrative, and maybe rightfully so, that, you said before you're looking for the best deal. That could be HEX, could be PulseChain, PulseX. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's kind of like, hey, you're looking to see what's out there. What do you say to people who are like, hey, HEX already went up 10,000x, maybe it's sitting at 1,000x right now or whatever. We know with the potential of PulseChain and PulseX, we see all the tokenomics and game theory. We got the people in the community. We believe in this project. It's going to be around for a long time. We know how many X's it's starting at. It's starting at 0. On price wise as well. What would be the case for, I guess, maybe not ignoring that narrative, but just looking at, is there a bigger picture to look at than why would I buy HEX instead of just getting the coin that's brand new and has the most potential in that kind of perspective?
So if I told you that you could make a 10-year investment in XYZ big blue chip country, right? Okay. Or this brand new country that's never existed with experimental tech, which one you want? Like, so as much as we say, hey, PulseX, whatever the new thing is, Wave is going to be positive, what you're looking at is, like, why does it have upside? Because it hasn't done it yet. Like, you're betting on the future. So one of the big things that I like to look for is like, if someone asks me like right now, do you think Pulse and PulseX are going to 1,000x? I know what they're asking, but I'm going to tell you no, because I don't think anything 1,000x's, because that shit doesn't happen very often. And I don't even want that like in my mental space. So what I do like about them is that I'm almost sure that they're going to likely 10x. And what I'm almost not even talking about price. What I'm getting at is I'm very, very confident that in the near future, I'm in a plus EV position, that I'm just up on value, right? I'm not betting on 1,000x's because that's a stupid bet. Like that's a 10-way parlay that hits, right? Those are bad bets. So I don't come into things where I'm like, hey, this thing can go up 10,000x. This thing can go up 1,000x. That's stupid. I know why we preach in our community. So again, I'm not bashing like, RH's sentiment or like HEX or those things. Like I'm just pushing back to like add some clarity to the framework, right? So betting on things 1,000x is stupid. Like you'll always miss, right? I don't look for that. Like if we're looking for these things, I want to look for something where I'm like, hey, I know I'm going to be up. I know I'm going to 10x, right? So if you look at the chart, you look at the participation, the community around something like HEX, what would go on where I see Fiat and I see the Maximus guys and I see Hedron and HSIs and XYZ and I see people on a cruise? What about that makes me think it's not going to give me a plus EV move in the future and then I'm not going to get a 10x? That's what I want. I want a locked and loaded plus move 10x. That's what I look for. I don't care what's going to 10,000x. If I did, I would literally just shotgun into whatever trash was out there and wait for the next meme to hit. It's a waste of time. So again, we want to have, again, I'm not saying that any of these things aren't going to be valuable. There's a reason I spend so much time in the ecosystem and all that. But when we're just looking for framework, don't think of it as just PulseX or things. Think of it as there's a new layer one that does not exist, that has a really big promise, and I'm hoping it does well. That's not meant to be like FUD on PulseChain, but that's how you need to look at that, because at some point, that's what this is. It's PulseChain because you love it and because I love it and because we all talk to each other. But to anything else, as an investor, as a speculator, it's a brand new thing that's never done anything, that starts at zero, that you're optimistic about. So add some of that framework to these things, and that's why you can say, hey, I'm going to dance with the one that brought me, the one that's done well, that has a Lindy effect that's been in history. So even for something like Bitcoin, like, is Bitcoin going to be around? If you said, hey, in 10 years, what's more likely to exist, PulseChain or Bitcoin? Well, I love PulseChain, so I'm very confident it's going to be here. But the answer is Bitcoin. It doesn't go anywhere, right? So we want to take away some of these emotional terms and make sure that we always, again, you want to have exposure, because these things can 1000x and they can 10,000x, and they can come in and break systems and do irrational things. And you want exposure to that, but you also want to dump some cold water and rationalize and look and say, hey, at some point I'm speculating on something that hasn't happened. Let me put that back in context.
Well, if and when we do the 10,000x meme, I think we may. I'm buying cigars. How about that? I'm buying cigars for everyone.
Let's do it.
Best Cubans I could find. Graphics, you want to pull on that thread or go?
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're hitting on is very important point. Is every one of these pieces to the chessboard that has been added, that we're all looking at and we're all excited about, it all came from a necessity of one thing needing additional stuff and trying to make one thing better. And that thing's been HEX, right? So HEX was the thing that was originally designed for a purpose, right? And it already showed in the past that it can perform extraordinarily well. Now it's retraced back down, obviously quite a bit, but still, PulseChain only exists because HEX needs a chain that can make it perform properly. PulseX exists to supplement that, so that PulseChain has a focus point for economic energy to come through, which can then possibly give opportunity to people in the ecosystem, right? So, I mean, when you put up everything, like we talk about all these projects that are coming out, they don't exist if HEX doesn't exist, and HEX is that thing. So yes, PulseX, Pulse, all these other protocols can do amazing, but I think, like you said, Wallace, they're new. They haven't been tested yet. We don't know how they're going to perform, and so it's easy to have that shiny object, not syndrome, but be like the new thing. It's going to go because HEX was the new thing once, and it went up 10,000 HEX. But that's not the safest way to do it. I mean, got to remember our roots and why all this exists, and not forget about the thing that caused this entire little mini revolution of sorts that we're kind of sitting in the midst of, right? And remember what you're holding.
Absolutely. Dylan, you got anything on that thread?
I went over it earlier about what you should expect, so but yeah, I agree with what's been said here once again. So
nice. I know we talked a lot about HEX. I mean, we did a Fiat demo for 30 minutes, which was amazing. However, we talked about HEX, talked about PulseChain, launch, different things around that. I wanted to, maybe we'll wrap up, maybe take another question or two, but we'll wrap up on one other topic. Kind of want to go around. Maybe we'll start with Dylan. Projects. So money printers, again, the theme of this, money printer strategies, money printers in the ecosystem. What do you like out there? Other than the blue chips, what do you think is, what are you excited for? Like, and why? Other than Fiat, we'll say that we know Fiat. We love Fiat, the demo and all that.
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you what, Dylan, he's going to tell me I can't talk about LL. So if you'll talk about LL, I'll talk about Fiat. We'll get our shields out.
Yeah. So,
there you go. Actually,
I do think that, it'll be valuable to use all of these products in tandem. Okay. There's so many complex ways that you can really figure out exactly what you want to do, because now you have all these tools at your exposure. Okay. What am I most bullish on? I mean, and I can't talk about Fiat or Famous, right?
I mean, you can just, I feel like Yeah, you can. I was just kind of thinking like anything else that's
Yeah.
kind of because I know for example I got to learn about Tetra recently and all of the volume that may come from it being created, connecting different projects and stuff like that. So I'm just generally interested in like the different money printer strategies. You can talk about Fiat Famous as well too. Just
I think that providing liquidity may be lucrative on PulseX, on PHUX. It'll be pretty overcrowded probably on certain pools, which is fine. But that's a great way if you're large enough to just accrue some yield naturally, right? And I think just being overall exposed to the ecosystem as a whole, it's probably all going to move up together. Some will outperform others, but generally speaking, if you're in the ecosystem, you're going to get exposure. Everyone's going to be buying, this thing or that thing. It's you probably just can't go wrong being in the things that are the most well known or that have some pretty large backings behind them in general, right? So, I know the two biggest raises in the ecosystem were LL and Famous, right? So, I don't think you can probably go wrong with those guys, right? And it's just this is a difficult question, right? It's you're wanting me to speculate on what's going to happen, when I've been telling you I think that we're going to get a dump, right? So.
Well, you could go into that too. It could be, hey, after the dump, like what
Sure.
is yeah, you want to go on that? Maybe that'll be a good conversation for it.
Yeah, so I mean, if if Pulse goes really close to zero, then Pulse is going to perform really well, right? If PulseX goes way out of whack and it gets to 20-1, then PulseX has much more leg room to outperform Pulse, right? If there is no dump, I think that the upside for Pulse and PulseX is probably limited more so than it is explosive at the top. Because you didn't have that shakeout of larger holders. I think you really want to get that toppy congestion from the larger guys. You kind of want to shake some of those guys out. Yeah, you want to shake those guys out. All right, naturally. And with HEX, we did a number on the chart in the first month, right? We literally went down 98%, that's pretty drastic. Okay. And a lot of people thought that it was over. It was a scam. Richard's taking all your fucking money with the ETH and shit. Right. And there were some people that were just scooping it up here and there.
Where is the ETH, Richard? Where is the ETH? Never.
Exactly. That was, if you go back to the hex.com chat, when I joined in February of 2020, right? The first thing I asked was, or mentioned, was the ETH. And I went on Etherscan myself and I went and looked at where the ETH was going from the flush address. And I inspected it myself. I was like, well, hey, look, the ETH is just going back into HEX. He's just filling up and arbitraging the prices, right? Anyways, I digress. It's a very hard question, right? We don't know what's going to perform the best. There's probably some fucking meme coin that comes out and obliterates everything. That's probably the likely scenario. Okay. So that meme coin probably doesn't exist yet. Okay. We don't know, right? It's the question you're asking is very loaded, right? I think you can't go wrong chasing yield in DeFi apps. You're probably not going to go wrong doing that. Providing liquidity in a way that you're paying attention and you're not, losing value or anything like that, right? Farming that incentive token, things like this, and then just staking HEX. You can't go wrong doing that stuff, I don't think. So, I think that's my stance. I don't know what's going to outperform the best, but I think searching for the yield, for the cash flow, searching for some sort of more riskless return is probably the way to go. And then since you're exposed to the entire ecosystem, you get to participate in the massive upside along with the yield that you're searching for, right? So I think that's probably the more reasonable stance, and that's the one I'll take. So
lots of yield opportunities. That's what's been so amazing about this, the whole ecosystem. Graphics, again, had a great conversation yesterday about it's just so amazing to see all the different ways you can get yield, all the fair, trustless games you can play, all the breadth. It's almost like, yeah, it's like there are money printers everywhere. That's why I want to have this conversation and kind of dig into a few of them. And it's just been, it's like every product seems like has some way of staking it, has some kind of game theory that doesn't want you to sell it in like a healthy way. Like you get rewarded for doing these things. You get in early, get rewarded. You hold longer, you get rewarded. It's all this like amazing type of thing. And that's why this conversation is so, it's almost effortless to even talk about. Not the predictions side or anything like that, but just effortless to be like, this is the ecosystem. This is the one. This is, Waters, you said it has the promise too, but is there such thing as like a super promise? I don't know how to describe it. It's like, it has promise, it has potential, but there's something about it where you just know it's going to work. It's just too many good things or ticking too many boxes. But anyways, I'll let you go into, you want to talk about LL or talk about any other, nascent money printer opportunities, but I'll frame it like that.
Yeah, I'll touch on LLs quickly, only because I think that it's where most users will actually use it, and it gets talked about the least. So I always like trying to actually bring it up. But I'll frame it. There's a couple of points I want to touch on. So I think to like Dylan's point on some of the liquidity providing being really high, I think there's almost a framing to take a small section of your bag into some of the pairs, take your poison. Again, I think we'd all probably list the top 5 in some different order, but it's the top 5, right? Almost look at it as, hey, I'm just burning whatever it is I'm actually providing in there, because I'm just going to assume that I'm just completely off. The impermanent loss is insanity. And just almost think of it as like, hey, I'm going to take 0.5%, 1%, whatever it is, some relatively small denomination, a couple of units, put them into this and say, okay, I'm going to get such an insane APY because it's going to have so much traction to move around. And I'm going to get the incentive token that I'm almost assuming that I'm never going to get that LP that I provided back. And then I'm just staking it as almost like a stake where I get a piece of the yield. I think that there's something to some of that framing on a smaller scale. Again, just, all right, I put it in at PulseX, and it's whatever ratio. It's going to move way off that position. You're going to take the loss there. But if there's just a ton of traction, just think of it as like, hey, I'm staking it in a pool, and I'm just taking the yield and fees and almost assuming that the LP's gone. Hopefully I get it back and I get some ratio, but like that's the framing that I would look at it for. So I think that's one of the more, if you're looking for a semi-aggressive play early on, I think that there's a framing to do that with a small percentage of your bag. And then the reason I was going to bring up LL is obviously natural bias, but with some of these things, when you hear guys like Dylan or anyone that just speaks a little more holistically, you and graphics as well, some of this, like when it comes for yield, a big part that we don't really think of that often in crypto is like risk on, risk off. So again, some of these big HEX players are going into stable coins, and they might do a variety of different things with them. So they're wanting to be risk off. They don't want exposure to the price of the situation. And you have that with yield bearing as well. So in LL, like we have the stability pool, and you hold USDL. So you're risk off. Market up and down doesn't really have that same exposure, and you just take the yield in. So in general, you start to look for more risk off yield, things that are stable where you don't have exposure to price whenever you're less, more bearish about market sentiment. And then with like you stake the loan token, you still have exposure to the price of the loan token as well as the yield it generates, so you're risk on. So kind of that same thing where some of the stuff is like just like adding to everyone's literacy, and like you're not gonna, for the most part, when you're listening to streams like this, yeah, you're gonna get some alpha and some heat, but for the most part, you should be kind of looking for like, okay, here's 4 or 5 things I think these guys said that's valuable. Like now let me really go process and understand them. So one of those is, again, looking at like risk on, risk off yield is something to like add to this. Like, okay, I want yield, but like what yield from where? So how's that yield being generated? That's a big question to ask, right? No one asked FTX, and here we are. You see it with Celsius, right? So you want to know where that yield is being generated. That's like a one-on-one question. And then the next one is it risk on? Is it risk off? And which one am I looking for? So Ella has both those. Again, there'll be a lot of great ways to look at those things. And then the last one on yield is, when you're getting paid yield, you're getting paid to do a behavior that someone else finds valuable, right? So if I was like, hey, graphics, I need you to come, I'm moving. I need you to come move. You can't do that for free because no one wants to come help you move. It sucks, right? But if I was like, hey, graphics, why don't you eat some ice cream? Okay, which one do I have to pay him more for? Okay, because one of those things sucks and is really helpful, and the other one's not helpful to me, and it's not that hard to convince someone to eat ice cream. Ice cream's awesome, right? So one of these things when you look at yield is again, what are you actually looking for? Because if you're getting paid something's like, so why is the APY in, some very, very volatile pair really high? Because no one wants to do it, and it's extremely valuable, right? So you get paid more when you're doing something that's more valuable, or when you're doing something that's more risky. That's why there's high yield. So now there's definitely kind of inflection points where some product is that risk profile is either just better or way better for what you're looking for. So with all the money printers, everyone's gonna pick their poison. Again, LL and Fiat are the large raises, big main projects. A lot of that stuff is where you want to stick until you have reason to do something different. But I think for just adding some clarity for someone else to actually take some real value is risk on, risk off. Where did that yield come from? And is, again, if someone's paying you 40%, some very, very high yield, why? That's a lot. Why I don't have to pay you a lot to do something easy, right? So if you look at like single-sided staking in PulseX, okay, sure, there's probably could be a couple like spurts and spats. We get some really, really high numbers. But if you're just holding something you were going to hold anyway, and I'm giving you something for free, like why would that payout be huge, right? Like that's not something I have to incentivize really, really highly. So single-sided staking and a lot of the stuff where they're like, yeah, I want to get yield and I don't want risk. Yeah, me too, man. So does everybody else. So that risk is lower. So I think that's a couple of things that people can really look through to, kind of be practical, find right stuff, risk on, risk off, and then where that yield comes from and does that yield make sense? Which again, if you look at a lot of stuff that's blown up here lately, they weren't asking that question.
Well said. Well said. Yeah, graphics. How about you? You want to continue on this, and then we'll take a couple questions from the chat.
Yeah, sure. I mean, everything both you guys said is pretty much bang on. So I'm trying to think of something that could supplement that hasn't already really been said. I mean, really, I'm okay. I'll start off with my favorite. It's my favorite in terms of what gets my brain going, not my favorite in which one I pick that's the best of all. My favorite in terms of game theory at the moment, obviously, I love Icos and Hedron. That's been my thing that I've gone the deepest with, so I understand it the most. But the more I learned about liquid loans, the more I learned about all these other even Fiat and all these other protocols, the more it's like there's just so many options, and they all kind of intertwine to this macro game theory, which is really cool. The more that you see how they kind of interlock horns and play together, and it's kind of like a really cool dance to think about and how it'll all work over time. So for me, and what I would be looking at and saying is take time to do research like crazy right now, research like hell, figure out exactly what every one of these tools does, and then figure out how it suits what you want to do and what your goals are. And only then, when you fully understand one, two, or three of these things that maybe fit what you're trying to do, then start making some decisions and start planning. And also, I mean, don't be afraid to, if you see something going in a way that you're not happy with, you can safe bet with also just like, okay, you know what? Not sure if I want to keep my tokens here for whatever reason. You can also pull them out of staking platforms. You can pull them out of protocols if you want to maybe sit on the sidelines for whatever reason, and just playing things safe, knowing what you're doing, and really researching the hell out of everything to make sure you know every option and the best options and why you're making every single click and decision you're making in the ecosystem. I think it's the only thing I could say you guys didn't say. So
easy one. I like it. Well, so I get to maybe take one or two questions real quick and we'll wrap up. Halil, aren't LP providers incentivized to pull out their liquidity of HEX before the fork? Who wants to take this one?
Yes, but some won't take that. They won't do that because it's too lucrative for them at the moment, right? So, there's going to be guys that stick around and continue providing liquidity for EHEX naturally, right? There's profit to be made there. So they're going to keep their liquidity there and let it bake.
You think even so we know, go ahead.
I was going to say, just on that same rant that all of us were just on. So providing LP is really valuable, and now no one's going to want to do it, which means whoever does it gets paid a lot. So they're going to be exposed to a bunch of rampant and permanent loss, but they're going to have really, really high APYs. So if you're looking at it, hey, it's 5, 6 cents, it runs to 10, whatever it does in there, right? If you're assuming it's going to get back there again, or that, again, if you're one of the players like Dylan was talking about that has all the HEX in the world, I wasn't going to sell it anyway. I'll provide liquidity, let it shake out, do its thing. I'll have a bigger share of the pool. I'll just take the yield.
What is the case for either of you? What is the case for keeping your liquidity, whether it's HEX USDC, HEX ETH, HEX Hedron? I know they all have different dynamics, but what is the case for keeping liquidity and not pulling it before the fork versus it, or is that just a bad idea all around, or does it depend on the pairs?
So HEX Hedron doesn't have to, because HEX and Hedron's relationship will be the same on either side. And both those are going to be supported. So if it's HEX Hedron, probably just do whatever you're doing now. Unless you're just concerned again about the volatility of the pairs. And then again, you can say, hey, I don't want to play that game, or those that stay in are probably going to have very, very high yield. When it comes to USDC versus the ETH, so the USDC won't be harvested by the AMM, but those pools are going to get wrecked. And since there's going to likely be DEX aggregators up pretty quick, no one's going to hold the monopoly PUSDC, and you're just going to get just drenched on there, and probably not enough fees to cover that up, because that pool is not really likely to recover. So
that's what I was going to say on that. Do you think the fees would make up for it? The bananas volatility or whatever we expect to happen, is that a play of I'm okay getting just murdered? I'm okay with getting all the USDC that's worth us at the end because of all the fees I made on the ETH side beforehand. Is that anything to that?
It could. And it depends again how you value those copies on the other side, right? So let's say we don't get a heads up. Let's say this takes another week, right? Everyone's getting antsy now. We start to see liquidity pool. Like if you get 3 weeks, a month, maybe it takes 60 days. Hey, I don't know if you guys have heard this thing was going to come out mid-May for a long time now, right? Jokes aside. So if you
May 2023,
still might.
right? So if you assume, hey, there's a longer period of restlessness than we think, right? We see that, you're like, okay, let's basically assume that, hey, I just get what I get on the copy side. I'm going to get 30 cents on the dollar, whatever they're worth over there. When I get to this huge APY along the way, maybe the position works out price positive. So some of that would just depend on like timeline function there. But I think in general, there's not that many like small liquidity providers really in that pair. So I think those people would probably just pull out and load their positions, but they're a pretty small percentage. The big guys probably already know what they're doing. So this is, it's more just conjecture. Those guys will make their own play, whether they want to just ride out the risk versus taking the copy side. But ETH, you'll end up being bought up. So you'll end up basically just like selling your HEX cheap for some PLS. So, and that pair is going to recover. So the HEX PUSDC is the one that if you're not going to pull, once you're on the other side, you're going to want out. And so where you'll have, say, the EHEX USDC, that pair is going to be volatile, and you might have some impermanent loss, but it's going to come back. Whereas the PUSDC HEX thing is just going to, and then once it's filled with PUSDC, there's no reason to interact with it anymore. You'll just have, 95 HEX in there at a billion PUSDC, and then no one's going to be willing to come in and pay them. So that would be the one that if you're a smaller player, that would be the one I'm most likely to pull.
Gotcha. Let's wrap up on this. I said 2 more questions. I'll take one of my own questions because I think it's interesting here. Just wrapping up on money printers. So what is the PHEX strategy? What is the staking? Do you think that me and Graphics covered this a little bit yesterday? Maybe Ethereum HEX will be for the whales and maybe the longer term players, and PHEX will be for trading and volume and stuff like that. Maybe that's one scenario that plays out. How do you secure what different? I guess maybe this question: what differences would you treat the network on EHEX versus PHEX? I know we need some time to see what happens, how people play it. Are they going to be staking more on one or another? Maybe it takes 6 months or a year to kind of figure out which one is for which thing. Or do you even think about it at all like that? Let's maybe start with Graphics. We'll come back to the top.
Yeah, really, like we were talking about yesterday, I think the part of the conversation was really what's going to happen in terms of like investor class is where are people going to migrate? And for me, the way I'm thinking of it at least is, yes, people are going to migrate to PulseChain, but who are those people? How much of a percentage of supply do they hold? And why are they moving over there? So the conversation we were having was, I don't know, less than 40% of people that hold HEX somewhere, probably closer to 20 or less %, I would say. At least in my speculation would be people that are going to probably want to move over, so, and of those 10 or 20%, let's say, how much of the total supply do they hold? Well, who are the people that want to go over to the PulseChain? Probably people that don't want to pay the fees, right? So who are the people that don't want to pay the fees? People that have not quite as much capital at their disposal. And so those people are probably the ones that could benefit mostly from shorter term gains. So I think that, in my opinion, at least, it wouldn't surprise me to see a migration of people moving over to PulseChain to do more shorter term staking. And to see an increase in people doing maybe some longer staking from the larger players who are looking to capitalize on the sell-off or any opportunities that might come up on the Ethereum side. And short of that, that's where my mind leads me. I want to hear from you guys. Like, what do you two think we're going to see? Do you see similar, or do you see something very, very different, and why?
I'm going to stand on the mic. Dylan, you want to go first?
Can you go over that question one more time, sir, please?
I was just asking based on what I was laying out there in terms of, like, the investor class moving, the percentage of people moving over to PulseChain, why, and then having like more shorter term stakes, which more shorter term mindset investors maybe over on the PulseChain side versus longer term, larger players mostly staking on Ethereum. That was kind of my thoughts. I wanted to just like kind of bounce it off you guys and see where that led you.
Roger. Yeah, that's a hard one. I think that HEX may be where the big guys hang out. They'll be on both chains, but it depends on if there's a bridge in of HEX and a very thick liquidity pool versus PX. It depends on, there's a caveat there, right? So if that's thick enough, it's going to do the same thing. There might be a little bit of a pricing difference, maybe 25% less or something, or 5, 10, whatever, right? But it really depends on what liquidity providers decide to do, because you could see a situation where they pull all of their liquidity on the ETH side, and then they just migrate it over to Pulse with the wrapped in stuff, and then you just have a bridge arbitraging whatever is left on ETH to match the prices on Pulse or something like this, right? So it's hard to say. I know some other guys or some bigger guys that said that they would be dumping their HEX. I know some that said that they'll just let it ride. It depends on what the market plans to do, which it's not something I can be like, oh yeah, this is going to happen, right? You just don't know. So with that being said, you gave me a hard one there, sir. So I'll keep my HEX stakes, right? Depending on if there's more value to be had on Pulse regarding the ecosystem, I might take my profit out of HEX and move it onto Pulse. If it's doing just fine and I don't see a lot of bigger guys continuing to get out, then I'll just leave it there. So it depends. It's situational. It's very situational in my eyes.
Yeah, just again, I think that's great commentary, and I think where I almost always again like default back to, if I don't know, then I'm taking the value. I'm not going to pay the premium for the guess, right? So if you say, hey, HEX or PX, okay, all right, well, the new shiny thing, I'm probably going to bet PX. All right, what about 3-1? Nope, I'm probably just going to take the cheaper one, right? And so again, anytime we get into any of these, as long as I'm basically have that, again, when it comes to certain things, this is, again, from that framework of things that I'm very, very confident are at least going to go up, right? It's different if you're taking more of a complete speculation. It's a startup, a variety of other things, but sort of between kind of these ecosystems where I don't think any of these things are going to zero, then again, I'm going to take the value if I'm unsure. The couple of things that I would add when it comes to some of the staking behavior is I think you'll actually kind of see them seesaw back and forth. Like to Dylan's point, it's situational. So if everyone comes in and stakes and there's a higher percentage longer stuff on one chain, all right, well, maybe I'll just take the yield on the other side. So they kind of go back and forth, right? Like the longer everybody else stakes, the more my price goes up. The more the more I sell, the more others can buy. Like there's a symbiosis there. So I'm just not, again, anytime I'm not sure, I'm not paying the premium. I'm going to take the other one. One thing that I think that, again, is one of those like we should get out in the ether is, so PulseChain is going to have low fees, but a lot of us expect adoption. We expect a lot of cool stuff. It does have throughput improvements over ETH. but these things still get full. Like, so we have this, again, to Graphic's point earlier, we have this chain now because the staking feature was crippled to some degree because of gas fees. Okay. So now we've learned that, hey, at some point, congestion can cause us to have to change behaviors, and these things can be very, very negative. Assume that if you think PulseChain is going to 10,000x and it's going to be awesome, the greatest thing ever, it's going to get full too. And so to take that into account with some of those staking behaviors and just take what we learned, right? So I think we're at a point where the tech overall is pretty right. So like we have more throughput than ETH, we'll be better off. We won't have some of the same congestion. We're more likely to see shard variations, any of this kind of stuff that comes in, more improvements with other tech. So like similar with like cell phones. So on cell phones, you get better hardware, but you get better software too, right? So even if the throughput never changed, we would still end up having less gas problems because contract writers and people get better and better and better about using that space up. So I do think that we'll be ahead of ETH naturally from the changes we've made, and that again, just time and market, we're just at a spot where we're more likely to see better innovations around gas. But you still want to bake that into the cost of some of these things, and assume that at some point, if you're taking 3, 5, 8, 9, 10-year staking time horizons, that it's going to be no matter how, maybe it's not expensive, but it's still going to be significantly more expensive than it is now, and bake that into your kind of your thesis on how you're putting these things together. And that can be either, hey, I'm actually more of a HEX Maxi, or I'm going to have a much bigger position in HEX. Maybe I'm just going to allocate some of that PLS and say, hey, this is gas money down the road. Setting some of that things aside. There are a few different ways, but I would add into some of the calculus to not make the same mistake that as a community and as kind of an environment as a whole, that we thought this would always be cheap. It wasn't cheap. And again, I think that's much less likely to happen on PulseChain, but it can still happen again. And you make sure that you just can factor that in. Just one of those things that doesn't really get discussed on the staking habit. So I want to bring it up.
Yeah, that's something that is very under talked about. Just people say you're always going to need ETH. ETH is your gas. It's going to power the network. It's going to do all this stuff. Well, if you use the analogy, you're always going to need Pulse, right? You need Pulse to do transactions too. Do you think Pulse is going to be the same price? Is it ever going to be as cheap as it will be when projects first start? If history points to anything, as long as it's not a scam, it tends to go up. So if nothing else, the ETH angle, I think it was Dixon Piper that was we were talking about that one day too, about you can always use ETH. Yeah, maybe you say now you can always use Pulse. It's another way to think about it. Yep. Gentlemen, it has been a stream. I appreciate all three of you for joining. I know you're ready to decompress just like I am. What do you want to take us out on? We'll start from the top, Dylan to Wallace to Graphics. What's good? What's bad? What are you looking forward to? Just briefly take us out on the best note you got.
Sure. Quick question before we wrap it up. Do you want to see me close my HEX short in profit, sir?
Definitely. Yes. Let's do it. In profit. Okay.
Yes.
That's not supposed to happen, is it?
No, it's not, right? But some guy dumped about $1 million worth of HEX while we were streaming. It just so happens that I put a short in beforehand. So
epic.
This is my initial principal of $2,880, right? So to buy back my HEX, 50 grand, only takes $269 now, $669. So
69.
Trial.
Completely out of HEX, and I'm going to go out on a limb and say that the market's probably going to recover a little bit now. So I'll take the his profit and put it in my pocket real quick. So look, there you go. I have a leftover $208. Now I'm going to go pay my loan back off. On to Fatty. So we're going to go back to my dashboard. I'm going to go repay my loan. Here we go. 50,000 HEX. That's how much I borrowed. And a little bit of interest, right?
Did you accidentally long HEX? Like, how would you describe the scenario, by the way?
The other way, I would be getting closer to being liquidated because I went long, right? So, but I went short. Somebody sold. I rebought at a lower price and kept a profit. So I made like 7% on that short or something like this. So it was $200. So there you go. I paid my loan off. I have nothing to repay now. I go back to my dashboard. I no longer owe any HEX. I have $6,200 as my collateral, and in my wallet, I should still have the $200, which I can now deposit for even more collateral. There you go, $200 left over. Boom. I shorted HEX, and none of you liquidated me. How brilliant!
You had 2 hours to liquidate Dylan, and none of you took
You
off.
failed. Yep. So,
Gotta get more whales on the stream. Gotta get more whales.
but yeah, that's just while we were streaming, just so happens that somebody dumped while I opened up that demo short, and there you go. The tool is
That's
being
funny.
used in such a way where you can make some money.
Well,
But yeah, I think this stream is great. I think we went over a lot of points. I think the thing to pay attention to for PulseChain is these tools. You got to learn how to use these tools. You got to learn how to do it, right? If you don't know how to do it and you start using them thinking, like you got a big fucking head because you're rich now, you're going to be somebody's profit margin. Learn how to use this stuff, please. Don't be stupid. Because when the time comes and you need it, you're not going to know how to need it. So, learn how to use this stuff. Learn how to use liquid loans. Learn how to use Fiat. Learn how to use Famous. Learn how to use or be a liquidity provider. Learn how to get that incentive token, etc. Things like this. Don't be left behind. This is the bear market. This is where you learn, right? You're supposed to hold in the bear market and learn as much as you can. When the bull comes, you're ready, right? We're in the bear market. Make sure you're learning and maximizing your knowledge, because that's the thing that's priceless in this market, is what you learn. They can't take that away from you, right? You can go to zero, but that knowledge, you have an edge over everybody else, and you can make it all back, maybe, right? So learn everything you can while you still have the time, and so you're ready for when the bull market does eventually come. But right now, keep your expectations low and get back to work, right? That's probably the best thing you can do, right? So that's my wrapping up of my points. So
beautiful. Walrus, what you got?
Yeah, man. Just appreciate you guys for having me on. Sorry about the tardiness, all that kind of good stuff. The strategy around all this chaos with consensus has been pretty wild. Yeah, it was a great stream. I really enjoyed it. I love talking to all you guys. I got a chance to talk to most of you guys at least a little bit individually there around. The graphics, I got a chance to tell you, congratulations, man. I've seen some of the stuff on the book, man. That's super cool. That stuff's really valuable. I've kind of taken that approach of like kind of moving to where it is. I think like, hey, there's some value here. Someone's not picking that stuff up. And the books, not only that, I think like that was something that got lost with like the NASCAR narrative. It's not just like who saw the NASCAR, but it's we have a NASCAR, right? So I think there's just anyone that picks up the books, there's value in that. There's value in you, and there's value that, that the brand, that the community takes from, your success, being like, hey, he's an author, he's writing stuff. So beyond just what those things sell, like putting that work in is really valuable. So that's cool stuff, man. And I think that the community gets a lot out of that. Those that do and don't buy the book should just be happy that people are out here putting out cool stuff. Man, just quickly on consensus. The community should be very happy that Gary Funding Jim is around. That guy is good at a lot of stuff, but he is a networking machine, and he has done a ton for the community that most people will never see. There'll be a ton of cool stuff that I end up putting out over so often that everyone will be like, woohoo, and it'll be like, that stuff wouldn't have happened without Gary. There'll be projects, a lot of stuff goes on. So a big tip of the hat to that guy. And then at Consensus, there was a lot of bullshit. So it's really different. I encourage a lot of people. In face is really, really different. In person is very different. Meeting people face to face. I've tried to kind of pick some of that up. Not that many in the community tend to go to the events, so that's why I started doing more than going to eat dinner with some of these. There's a lot going on out there in the space. It's easy to get kind of get lost in all that, in our own little bubble here. So I think we opened a lot of cool doors. We've got a chance to network and bring in a lot of cool people. I'm really excited about what a lot of us can do here is we have a chain and, some more things to point at, chain, a chart, products, all this kind of cool stuff. So I've gotten reinvigorated. I'm about to take probably 3 or 4 days and just get some rest in and get redialed in. But I've been really reinvigorated seeing how many people in the space are just doing cool stuff. So many of us that were just, participating at a certain level just kind of keep tearing up, whether it's streamers just having better quality, whether it's, Corey, still somehow in a tank top, but he just keeps crushing it with the best guests. All that stuff is so powerful for everybody, man. So eventually one day, man, we're gonna get him on with Elon or Trump and get him some sleeves, and then we'll have a killer there too. So there's a lot of success in the space, man, and there's a lot of teamwork that goes on. So just a lot of the communities reached out. I got a chance to participate a bit with somebody who's close with Senator Lumens. She was at Consensus, and somebody plugged me into that connection there. Just the community was like, hey, these people are looking for input. Can you reach out and talk to them? The community, again, I'm the one that was able to load their lips a bit, but a community member reached out and set that stuff up. I've never even really spoken to them that often. They're an admin that does some work, but this wasn't even a friend-to-friend thing. They just reached out to someone in the space they thought could offer some help. KG's done a lot of cool stuff recently. We tried to help, just put value. So just find value. It's getting the overall narrative on all this kind of stuff that we talked about is if PulseChain wins, then like all this stuff ends up winning. So stop bitching, do your part, pick up something heavy if you can. Like there's a lot to get done, and all this stuff is plus EV when we work together. So I love you guys. It's been a lot of fun. It's been a crazy couple of weeks, and yeah, a lot of people are getting stuff done. So yeah, I appreciate all the stuff everyone's building.
Appreciate you, man. Yeah, you and Funny Jim have been doing God's work down there and everywhere, and it's great to see people at other conferences to spread the good word. So yeah, I know you guys are having fun, but you're also providing a huge utility. It's a win-win situation. So I love it. Love it. How about you, Graphics? What's going on, man?
Yeah, well, thanks for the shout out on Walrus with the book. I appreciate that, man. It was a lot of fun to put that together, and it's cool to see the community kind of jump on that and be super supportive and be pushing that as well. So, and on that note too, it's really cool. It's been a while for me to be on a stream with. I haven't really streamed a lot in the last while, and to be here with Dylan the first time, us talking together, and Walrus being back on stream for the first time in a while, and just being. And hearing, especially because Dylan and I haven't met, and it's cool every time someone else comes in to at least that I meet, that I can see how much knowledge everywhere you go, every new person that comes into at least my personal frame is like, there's just so much knowledge, so much experience everywhere. And that covers every nook and cranny in this ecosystem. And everywhere you look where things are being built, there's just so much innovation and so many crazy intelligent people everywhere that I'm just thankful to be a part of it. Makes me excited. And whether PulseChain launches in 2 days, like I'm hearing now that some people are expecting, or 2 months or whatever, I mean, I'm just excited to see it all unfold and to watch, everyone's face starts to smile a little bit more. Everyone starts to get a little more excited and start to realize how real this really is eventually here. And I hope it's sooner than later, but even if it takes some time, then I'm still stoked. So I just want to say shout out to all you guys, and thanks for being here. And thanks, Max, for putting this all on. This has been an absolute blast, and I've learned a lot actually as well, just from sitting down with all you guys.
Absolutely. I mean, I couldn't do it without having great guests like you all, and just people in the community providing utility, putting the work in, doing the work. And yeah, that's what I love to talk to people who are doing work. I mean, I feel like it's so underrated. Like that's why I started streaming. If you ever hear my origin story, I go on streams, talk about it. Like I always remember that time. I've heard you say it more than once, but he was like, people ask him, hey, what can we do? How can we help the community? What can we do? He's like, have utility. And it always stuck with me, like have utility. That made me start streaming. That made me start coming, I've been following Richard for 6-7 years, and no one knew who I was until the last year because I wasn't public on Twitter. And I was like, I need to have more utility. I have a certain set of skills. I feel like I can contribute. Don't know anything about streaming. I'm gonna start doing it though. And I'll make friends along the way. I'll get people together, have conversations, get better interviewing. And yeah, it's been a beautiful ride. So I appreciate all of you coming on, and fantastic stream. Great one to wrap the week up on. I'm super tired. With that, everyone, again, relax, have fun at Consensus, Walrus, don't party too hard. And Dylan, congrats again on the launch. Go buy Graphics' book. It's awesome. Yeah, man, I think the future's bright. We got many more awesome people in the ecosystem that's what's on screen right now, but the ones we have on screen, pretty good. So
thank you, sir.
Thanks for the kind
Appreciate it,
words. Yeah. Send Buck the regards as well, and the whole team. Yeah.
Hey, thank you.
All right, gents. Scivive and 5555, everyone. We are out.
There we go.